Welcome everybody. We are back for another fun live stream. This is pretty rare for me. I think might be my third one in like the entirety of the month. So we're on a spree here. But today we're joined by a really special guest, Retrospecs. He has been on the channel a few different times before, but never one on one. So this is something I've been looking forward to actually, like I guess all week since I've reached out to you because I know that we've chatted so much privately, like back and forth, and we've been in this for around the same amount of time, like I kind of talked about pre-stream. But I'm really excited to talk today, really focusing on a lot of the financial business aspects. If you guys have read the description, I know a lot of people don't do that anymore, but I did put a almost like a kind of a warning, I guess. This will not be collector focused conversation today. This is definitely going to be more of the kind of financial business aspect of it. I know last week, I had a really, I guess what I would call a true collector on, has never sold a card in his life. So I'm kind of flipping the script a little bit on this time to give you guys a little bit of everything on really the business aspects of everything. So, Retro, I know that most people who follow this channel probably already follow you, and I feel like I'm singing the same song as everybody else on this, but maybe just give a quick kind of recap of who you are, kind of what you're doing in the hobby, and yeah, for anybody watching back who subscribes to this channel that doesn't subscribe to Retrospects, maybe give them an idea of who you are, if you don't mind.
Yeah, thanks, man. Appreciate you having me on. It seems like everybody you have on is like a heavy hitter in the hobby. So hopefully I can live up to those reputations. But
No different here. No different here at all.
yeah, I appreciate that. But yeah, I'm Nick, Retrospecs. Retrospecs on Instagram. My eBay is Retrospecs Collectibles. I primarily specialize in Japanese cards and collectibles. I do both, but the lion's share of it is definitely Japanese. Selling singles and graded cards and stuff on eBay, and then also recently been doing the Japanese sealed wholesaling, so selling like booster boxes and things like that. Yeah, got in around the same time as Peak. Met him in the Pokenomics Discord, and I've learned a lot from him over the years, whether it's about like Worlds cards and different Pokemon stuff, and also shoe flipping as well. So Peak is always the plug when a new sneaker is dropping on sneakers or confirmed or the Adidas app. So tap in with PeekDatchu for all your sneaker flipping needs.
Yeah, for sure. No, it's that's one thing I wanted to make sure I titled, in this stream as we went through, because both you and I have I guess kind of a diversification model, with this, when it comes to what we do, because there is Pokemon involved, but obviously there's different aspects of Pokemon, whether it be, like you said, doing the wholesale piece, buying raw cards and grading those and flipping those. So, ultimately today, what my goal is for anybody watching this, obviously live, which I appreciate your chat. I see a few people in here. Walrus is here. So we're blessed for the chat god, being in here today. But
That's all we need.
ultimately, absolutely, absolutely. So, the goal is really just to kind of talk about, how we kind of went really from this being more of a kind of a fun hobby and really converting it into a true business and a true profit center for us. Whether it be full time or whether a side hustle. I know myself, this is really just something on the side for the most part. But really talking about, kind of the experiences, the successes, and my hope is for anybody who has been in cardboard for a while, whether it be collectibles or, again, you mentioned sneakers, which is funny, which we'll definitely talk about, any other collectible. The goal is really to understand, people like us, we started the same as everyone else. You kind of buy that nostalgia, or you kind of see people talking about it. So you want to get into it, you start buying some stuff and think, well, I've kind of spent all of my money on what I can collect. How do I further this? If you don't necessarily want to take your primary, career, your job money, your personal money, and actually put it into collectibles, but you want to actually take the collectibles money and turn it into almost a profit center that allows you to either further a collection or ultimately, hey, I like these collectibles, but I don't mind holding on to them for a month and then moving along to something else. That really just understanding the experiences that we've both had. And I think this will be a really good, take as far as like the unique paths that we've both taken, because I know we align similarly in kind of how we've navigated the hobby. But I know especially with you recently, you've done a lot of really cool stuff, and I don't want this to focus necessarily on my journey, primarily. I'll kind of have my tidbits in this, but ultimately, I want it to be focused on you because I think what you've done as far as building a business, really sharing and being very transparent, and a lot of this has been extremely helpful not only for myself, but I know a lot of people in the hobby. I think all of us are fairly excited to kind of follow your journey and what you've been doing. Shout out the vlog vids that have recently been happening. I love those for sure. If anybody doesn't subscribe to Retrospect yet, I've got all this stuff linked in the description. I know last week I said I was going to do it. I think it was like 5 days late. So I promise they're already in here on this stream. But really, really good content, seeing kind of that day in the life, almost is how I would describe that. So, I guess maybe take us back a little bit on, when you first started kind of, I know the goal, I think from what I remember us talking, privately and a little bit of the public stuff you've shared, you really started, for that profit goal, really to get in and buy stuff and really sell things. So maybe take a couple minutes and give me an idea of when you started, kind of what that looked like in your head, long term, and kind of what it's morphed into. I guess that I think that'd be a good place to start.
Oops, I was muted. Yeah. So I mean, like, to be completely honest, like no one in my family is really like a heavy collector or anything like that. So I didn't even as a kid, like obviously I collected and had fun as a kid, Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh, Dragon Ball Z, all that sort of stuff. But I never had exposure to broader collectibles markets, and I never like saw how much money and how many big businesses were in collectibles markets, right? So when I came in during the pandemic, I had no idea how big the hobby was even before it exploded, how much money was in it, how big of businesses people had built. And then obviously, like after the boom, all these new people come in, all the interest re-enters the hobby. Like when I started, to be honest, I mean, I at first I was just ripping stuff. I think like most people that got back in, right? Like I was going and watching like Twice Big Jake and Leonhardt and figuring out what like the hot sets were, so I knew like what to buy and wasn't buying like the bad sets at the store just to rip. And then like you said, quickly you're like, okay, I've been spending some money here. Like, how can I sort of like recoup this so that it's more sustainable? And it got to the point where I was like, okay, I discovered how to buy from Japan. Understood grading. Grading finally opened at $50 at the time, and I was like, okay, if I can like pay my rent, like if I could just pay my rent with cards, basically like pay my mortgage, that'd be cool because then I could roll more into the market, right? Like investing and stuff like that. And so that was the goal initially, was just to basically like cover the mortgage. And I underestimated the potential in this business. I thought that the ceiling for this was extremely low because again, I didn't really know what was possible. And yeah, so I set my sights pretty low and quickly sort of got past the point to where I was, like I said, able to cover like basic bills, mortgage and stuff like that. And I was like, oh snap. And then, obviously watching, a lot of the big businesses, Rusty, James, Nick, Dan, all that sort of stuff. I was like, okay, wow, like there's some real money in this. There's some real potential in this. And so I just kept on pushing and pushing and pushing and wanted to see where I could take it. And yeah, I mean, like at first, like I was mainly just doing the singles and the graded card stuff, and I quickly, well, maybe not quickly, it took me a couple of years, but I realized that sort of business model is not infinitely scalable, and having that as only the main, like only one source of income being coming through eBay and stuff like that was not infinitely scalable. And so I realized that I needed to sort of branch out, have multiple streams of revenue, have multiple like sort of options as business models, even within cards and stuff like that. And so that's really sort of happened over the past few months, to where I've been branching out and things have exploded. And so I'm just really excited to see where it goes in the future.
Yeah, I mean, that's one thing that I find very fun, and I'll use the word exciting because I know following your content, especially with the wholesale change that you've done now, and being able to do that, it's great to be able to kind of catch someone at the beginning and kind of see how they expand, especially when it comes to revenue streams. That is one thing that I've realized over, even when I started, it was one of those things. I mean, literally the exact same thing you said. It's like, how many raw cards can I grade to flip? And I mean, you kind of reach a ceiling, at that point. It's like, sure, are there some big wins, especially when, around the time we got in, it was during the pandemic. And it was like, I mean, if you just put anything, you could put your toenail in plastic and you're making 100% profit. I mean, it was just insane. So being able to diversify, a portfolio, I think is extremely important, when it comes to building a business in this. And for anyone kind of starting out, coming in and saying, wow, I graded a card, maybe I bought one pack of Evolving Skies, and all of a sudden I've pulled a Mubrion, right? And I've graded that, and I've sold it for just an exorbitant amount, and had no idea this was even a thing. I've got 1,500, 1,600 bucks. What do I do with this at this point? Um, it's one thing that I know that myself, which I think differs a little bit from kind of the way you started, because I know you said you started by ripping patch and really going after sets, watching a lot of YouTube content. And one thing I realized kind of very early on is, I personally went after very rare, hard to grade, hard to acquire promos. That's really where I made, a decent amount of money going into this hobby, and had a really good, I guess I'll call it a head start, when it comes to this.
Do you think
Um,
that you sort of had that goal or mindset too, because you were so experienced with like the alcohol stuff, like knowing the exclusive drops and like seeing how that market operate? Like, did you already sort of have that knowledge coming in, and that made you see like, okay, I'm gonna find what the parallel is in this hobby and go after that?
For sure. I feel like that's almost like a Pokemon Wonder comment, by the way, knowing the backstory on me. So yeah, for anybody who doesn't know, I was very much into the, believe it or not, there was a collectible alcohol market. There's that across all of them. So exactly spot on. And that was something that, you can always get the regular releases that come out, and be able to, it's a little different in cards in the fact, like, if it's available, it's available, and you're not really going to do anything. You can make lunch money, brick profit, whatever, if you wanted to resell something. But realistically, it didn't happen. It was all about hunting whales and grails, and stuff that maybe there's, I think the rarest bottle I ever had, they made 300 bottles total at a brewery. I sold it for 1,200 bucks, 2 bottles for $1,200, and it was just insane. For a bottle of beer. By the way, anyone watching, I mean, that's astronomical, to most people, which should give you an idea of how people feel when we say we sell shiny cardboard for multiple $1,000s. But um, really, it is that, but also when I got in, it was never to make a financial gain, or create a business with it. It was truly just, I want to buy the stuff I really liked when I looked at it as a kid. Um, but I guess, I start going on E4. I start looking at promos. I start looking up really rare Japanese stuff, and understanding what it is. And then what really was the crux for me was looking on eBay and trying to find them, and not being able to. It's always been about the treasure hunt for me. So it kind of went hand in hand with, like, okay, I can actually locate these. This was when I had Facebook, and I could actually, like, go to those Verbank groups and all this other stuff. And I was able to find a lot of these cards, that a lot of people weren't looking for, or maybe didn't even realize that existed. Um, and, I was able to capitalize on that. The goal wasn't to capitalize, but once I was grading things and really pulling, some of these cards for really, really good prices from original competitors, specifically to Worlds cards, um, once you start seeing, 4, sometimes 5 bigger cards, enter your collection, it's like, wow, what can I actually do with this? How far can I really take this? And that was really crux of me, starting an LLC, doing a business, and saying, you know what, I'm just going to scale this. I'm going to buy the vintage that I really like. I'm going to take advantage of modern sets. And I know you and I both, actually, and this is a big topic, I think, for both of us. We ignored modern almost wholeheartedly, I think, in the beginning, right? Like, I'll never forget the video you talked about, like, missing the forest for the trees, like, talking about how you were wrong on modern. It was like, hey, this is a pop 20, so much in demand. Everybody should be after this, but they're buying, alt arts, or they're buying baby shinies, I think, maybe back then, So, that's one thing I think, I'm curious about yourself, when you really, in my opinion, just from the outside looking and watching your content, what really was the switch for me was you realizing that modern was an actual play, and really going into that. Because I think that really allowed you to kind of look in an avenue, or a couple of avenues, maybe that you didn't have in mind before. You thought, like, hey, I'm going to get the rarest cards. I'm going to get the um, low pop Japanese unlimited, whatever it may be. Um, And that kind of switched your brain. Am I wrong on that? I mean, is that something that kind of really was a light bulb, you know, that went off that kind of set you on a trajectory that you're at now?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely was wrong, and to be completely honest, like a lot of it was because I agreed with, and I thought that the sort of argument that a lot of the market channels were, you know, putting out there, like I thought it was compelling, right? I thought like the low pop story, hard to grade, and then you start getting into like new, like maybe this came out of a tin, and the tin, the way it was packaged makes it like really difficult for this card that sometimes it'll get a dent, or like, you know, everybody knows the Masakis with the Masaki, like, you know, understanding all of that sort of, you know, little intricacies of every different card, why it's low pop and all that sort of stuff. Like that's compelling to me. That makes sense to me. And what I missed again, because like I don't have, or at the time, like I didn't have any sort of like prior knowledge of any collectibles markets really at all, because I just wasn't around it for my entire life. What I missed was the demand part of it. And I was so heavily focused on like the supply and how difficult it was to get these things, you know, like listening a lot to like Dan and Jake and Z and all those sorts of people that sort of build businesses off of those kinds of items, right? Like more of the WotC, more of the old promos and stuff like that. And so I thought that was really compelling, but yeah, I just got to a point to where I remember that video, you know, because I had like the unlimited E series Polytoad, and then I had like some rainbow Dragonite V Star in like a CGC 10, and I was like, this is so dumb, but like it makes sense. Like I mean, Dragonite's a more popular, and a lot of people even commented on the video, and they're like, "But no one wants Polytoad. Everybody likes Dragonite." And I'm like, "Yeah, I get it, but
But the rarity, the conditional rarity, it fries my brain thinking about that as well. Same exact thing, because I think
yeah."
like low
But
pop, hard to get, hard to grade. Yeah,
like one of the things too is like I went very wide with like my knowledge base, right? So like I started like learning about comics, I started learning about Marvel cards, I started learning about sports cards, I started like learning about so many different things. And what I started to see was that in all of these other markets, it was the exact same. Video games, same exact thing. You can go buy the new Zelda game that comes out, send it to Wada, get a 9.8 and make money, right? And then you buy like some
right.
crazy vintage hard to find. It's the same exact thing. I'm sure it's probably the same in VHSs or what. Like you could probably go find a new popular Disney movie that comes out, send it to the VHS. It's the same exact thing in all of these markets. And if you look at like a lot of the old vintage comics, just because it's a vintage Spider-Man comic does not mean it's valuable. Only key issues hold value. And it's kind of similar in Pokemon, right? Like Charizard's a hold value, Pikachu's a hold value, things like that. But like all these other Pokemon, even though they're very difficult to pull, and I mean, we see that, right, with like how negative EV it is to open packs. And sometimes even if you hit a Charizard or a Mew or a Gengar or something like that, and even 10 it, you're still losing money, right? So all the fundamentals don't matter as much as demand does. And that's something I had to like slowly learn as a business. But again, a lot of that I learned from looking at all these other markets, and I was like, it's the exact same thing in all these other markets. Modern is where demand is. Modern is the highest volume sales. So if you're a collector and you want to like do private deals with whales and stuff like that, you can stick to the rare promos, you can stick to the ultra rare cards, but that's at least for me, like that's not a sustainable business model. And that pie is a lot smaller. So when you already have people like Gem Mint and Radar and stuff like that operating in that space, me with no connections, no network, how am I going to compete? Right. But in modern, like I can compete in that and I can scale that business infinitely. And it's not to say I don't grade vintage stuff. I do still grade like a lot of vintage and mid-era and stuff like that. But again, like the lion's share of what I'm working with now is definitely more modern. And then with the Japanese sealed wholesaling, like that's been crazy. And again, that's all modern, right? That's all modern booster boxes. And when I got in, like a lot of people too, like I remember vintage versus modern was like a big debate in
That
Pokemon
was
YouTube.
for like a year. Yeah,
Yeah,
it
but
was
I always
nonstop.
I always genuinely, again, like even though the dynamic of the fundamentals, like that argument was compelling to me about the vintage stuff, I always liked modern. Like when I got in, I opened Shining Fates. I pulled a Charizard. I thought it was cool. Like I legitimately liked it. Even though I grew up with the WotC stuff, with the Neo stuff, you know, open Aquapolis packs, like that that stuff was what I grew up with, but I still genuinely liked modern. And so I just like have been ignoring it this whole time, to my detriment. So, but to be honest, like that's been a lot of it for me, is like I am so stubborn, or I turn my brain off to something and it limits me. And as soon as I'm like, all right, let's see what's going on here, then I get like a new revenue source, right? So moving forward, I have to stop having like preconceived ideas about like what things are or how things operate, right? And just be more open. That has been the biggest like growth for me, is just like pulling my head out of my behind and realizing that there's this whole big world out there, and the way that I think about things isn't necessarily the way the market operates. So sorry for the rant, but
No, I mean, this is all like very accurate stuff. I mean, even during the vintage modern debate, I mean, I took a side immediately. I was like, vintage all day. I was like, modern is just for the casual. It's not really the people spending money in this hobby. And I think one thing that we've really noticed, a lot as businesses in this is modern cards absolutely sell. You and I both have been to multiple shows at this point, like in person, and you look at the collecticons of the world. I mean, it's people want the newest and the new. What do you have? What alt arts do you have? Do you have master balls? I think that was the biggest one at Dallas Collecticon. It was like, do you have raw? Do you have graded? Like, we'll buy everything. And for someone say getting into this as a business, or maybe they want to kind of take those baby steps to get into it. I think the biggest challenge for, let's say, someone new in this hobby, and we can kind of dive a little bit on this topic in particular, is there's so much to buy. I always joke with friends in this hobby, you yourself, like, I don't have a what to buy problem. I have a capital problem. Like, there's so many things to buy. It's like all I need is money to do it, which is a funny thing to say out loud, but it's like there's so many quote unquote plays or opportunities, I guess is probably the better way to describe it, in this hobby when it comes to, and we're just specifically talking Pokemon. Like, we'll expand a little bit more into other collectibles that you and I both have been fairly successful in. But with Pokemon in particular, it's always interesting because you look at vintage cards, and the dips and the ups, it really is an ebb and flow. I mean, it's like modern is, realistically been kind of a rocket ship the last, in my opinion, like 2 years. Like, it seems like every set that comes out, it's like, if you're grading tens on chase cards, I mean, it's free money at this point. And it's like, can you buy it low? Can you sell it high? Sure. Can you pull it from the pack? Sure. Like, there's multiple ways of acquisition of some of these cards where, you can even ride the coattails of say Moonbreon. I'll use Evolving Skies as the example because it's literally the poster child for all of modern at this point. It's like alt arts are doing really well because I think Moonbreon is hitting prices that we none of us ever expected. Like, if anybody says, yeah, I knew Moonbreon was going to hit $1,500, $1,600, like, you're full of shit. At this point, it's like I would have capped that at probably a $600 card at most, and even then, I was like, that's crazy to me. But from what we've seen, everything is rising in that particular set. I see people now, like, really specking on, when Pokemon Center goes out of stock on a certain set, like, they're just buying it up. And it's very interesting to see. And it's interesting because I think, where do the buyer and seller percentages come in? Because I think a lot of people get really excited about sealed product. I know that's one thing that a lot of people have talked about. And I don't know if you use Reddit or not, but I'm in the Pokemon TCG investing and like Pokemon investing and stuff like that. Their biggest thing, I've seen people post multiple times, probably upwards of three to, I don't know, $10,000 worth of sealed product. They're just sitting on. They're like, here's what I got, sleeping on this for 2 years or whatever it looks like. I guess as a business, now that you've done this for a while, and especially working the modern side, let's say if I'm starting out, I'm dipping my toe in, I'm starting to buy stuff with a profit, margin in mind. Does it make sense to start with one thing in particular that kind of rises above the others? It's kind of the easiest way to enter into this market, or is it just, buy what you like, put it in plastic, and sell for a premium? I mean, what's your opinion, when it comes to that?
I think it depends on like what your financial situation looks like, and what you like. If you have a solid job and you sort of just want to do this on the side for fun but like make some money, like, you can afford to buy some cards, send them off to grade, and wait. But if you're maybe not as financially insulated and trying to use this to grow wealth, I think starting out, the best thing is to turn things over quickly. So like buying buying collections, breaking things down, selling things raw so that you can turn your money over very quickly. I mean, dude, I sold all sorts of stuff. Like I would sell Pokemon Center exclusive, like Japanese Pokemon Center exclusive Game Boys and N64s and stuff like that, because I didn't need to send it off for grading. I could just get it in, list it on eBay, immediately turn it around for profit. And for a while, like when I first started, like grading wasn't even open, right? And then when grading was open, it was $50 a card. So I had to be very like selective on what cards I was buying, only send the cards that I thought were going to get a 10, and to where the profit margin made sense when the cards came back. So I think if you're just starting out, it's good to, you know, if you have $100, try to buy like $100 collection that maybe you value at like 175 or something like that, and sit, do the work, and break it down. And that's available in Pokemon. It's available in a lot of hobbies. Like one of the guys that I met in the Tech and Sports Patreon, is he has a YouTube channel. His name is Somebody Talk to Keen, and he does sports cards and stuff like that. But he's doing really well. I mean, he'll do higher end cards and stuff like that. But part of the reason he's doing so well is because he will do the work on cards that other people don't want to do. So people will come, drop off like 500 to 1,000 cards to him. You know, he'll get them for 50 cents a pop, turn around and sell them on Whatnot, and get $2 to $3 a piece for them. And he's doing crazy high volume, and those margins are insane, right? But people don't want to take the time to sit and list 100 $2 to $3 cards, right? But because he has a platform on Whatnot, he can you know, run those auctions and sell maybe like 300 cards, 500 cards a night, and make those really good margins and things like that. So a lot of different ways to make money, but it really just depends on like what your personal situation is, what your goals are, and you know, like what your finances are looking like too. So yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a really good description of it, because I know whenever, you know, I first started and really just decided like, hey, I'm going to make this a business. I want the tax breaks, you know, et cetera. As we all know, you can only friends and family so far, by the way. You know, you get to the point to where, at least with myself, I was thinking, you know, am I going to be a volume heavy business? And this was back in Nick, shout out old school Pokemon, not this Nick, but another one. He was, you know, the joke was, is he was selling like 15 set singles like nonstop. Like that was his business model. And he was the prime example that I had for volume based business. I mean, literally thousands and thousands of cards to make like, you know, lunch money at that point, you know, just selling and selling and selling. And so when I first got into this, and my, you know, financial kind of strategy has changed a little bit, where I'm sort of in more in the middle of the road now. But I know that originally mine was, I wanted to do very, very low volume and very, very high prices. And that's primarily what I focused on. And I did very well in that, in my opinion. And it was one of those things that eventually, you know, it's almost like, not that everybody did that, but I think that, you know, you had named some names earlier, and there's a lot of buyout groups who got a lot of these big like trophy cards promos, and everything was mooning there for a while. You know, they kind of priced out the individual buying these cards, because realistically, like for anybody who pays attention to trophy cards or super rare promos or conditional rarity, you know, cards, things like that, you know, it's not just a single individual dropping 20, 30, $40,000 on these cards. A lot of the time it's a group of individuals. Almost look at it as like a fund. And then when that eventually sells, they get distributed whatever allocated funds and, you know, profit margin that they agreed upon, you know, within that. So it kind of forced me to change, you know, what I was doing. You know, I had never looked at modern. I don't think I actually, and I don't even know if I've said this, but I don't know if I opened a modern pack until 2021 ever. The last pack I opened before 2021 was like a Team Rocket pack, like in the store. So it's one of those things. I started, you know, getting curious. I was like, well, let me check this out. Let me see what modern's all about. And it eventually led me to think like, this is a really good supplement for buying vintage cards that, you know, for those big pops, or you know, very, very expensive cards that I can find a raw version, and maybe there's conditional rarity, which is really the easiest chase, right? It's like, it's still difficult to grade them tens, but it's easier to find, you know, raw copies, things like that, right? It's not like you're gonna have to go out and, you know, let me buy a $20,000 raw card to hope to grade it at 10 to sell it for 60 grand. Like, no, you can usually get, you know, pretty decent mint-ish copy cards for maybe, you know, a couple $100 at that point. And if you hit the 10, maybe it's a $2,000 card. Like that was kind of my strategy that at least initially morphed out of like, wow, I've been priced out of a lot of the raw that I've been buying. So now I can actually, you know, focus on this. Um, And I know that, with modern cards now, that's sort of supplemented that, as well as other, we talked about sneakers, which we'll definitely get into because you're my sneaker guy when it comes to like sharing that in the Pokemon space. But being able to take kind of a diversification, in your, I don't necessarily like to call it investing in a business because you're not really investing, you're buying to make profit. Diversifying, what you're actually dabbling in when it comes to markets and communities and things like that. It's such a benefit to kind of spread that across things other than Pokemon, because I don't know if you've run into this, but for myself, it's been very frustrating if I just stick in Pokemon because I'm like, why does the market not value this as much as I do? Why is this mooning and it's such a basic card? Like, what am I looking at? Where did I miss the boat here? Um, so I don't know. That's just kind of my rant. When it comes to that, it's there's a lot of different ways to do it, but I know that myself, I've been a little bit more in the middle of the road, using modern to fund vintage purchases that hopefully, those are big gains, and these are kind of small incremental gains. I guess is what I would describe it as. Um, One thing I do want to do, I tend to ignore chat news recently, and I don't want to do that. So, Walrus, you had the first question, which I know he asked a lot of funny questions. But question: when I first got deeper into YouTube, Retro was a grump online. Did any of that have a negative impact on his business?
Well, like it might have. I'm sure there's a certain amount of people for sure that unfortunately saw a side of me that was not, very attractive or welcoming, and that may have turned them off to like doing business with me or supporting me or reaching out and trying to be friends with me. And that's my fault, and that's definitely unfortunate. Obviously, like it's not something I can like tangibly measure, but I imagine there's definitely a certain percentage of people that are not fans. So
I will say, one thing that I really appreciated about you when we jump in like Discord chats and stuff like that is you're very opinionated and you ask questions. They may have been in a very angry tone, but that was okay. Like, because you were legitimately curious about why is this like this, and that's something that I think it's so much more. I don't agree necessarily with the grump online. I don't think he was necessarily negative. I think that Nick Retro. I think he was very. He wanted answers he wanted justifications on why people were doing stuff, and I think he wanted them now, and that was like completely okay. One thing I've told a lot of people in this hobby when it comes to networking and connections, it doesn't always mean that you have to be like the nicest guy in the room. You don't necessarily have to come in and say, "Oh my gosh, like I'm such a fan if they're a content creator, like, oh my god, like you don't have to fanboy over people's collections." Sometimes, and I get messages like this and I reply to them, I prefer the directness of like, I've got this, what would you sell this for? Are you interested? If not, where would you recommend I do this? And like somebody's just kind of shooting their shot, they're populating in the general inbox, right? Like I'm like, and I read everything that people send me, but that's one of the things I've always kind of appreciated about you is that you've been able to, no matter who you're speaking with, you're genuinely curious on how people are navigating this hobby, and that's something I think a lot of people just sort of take the YouTube content, buy all this sealed or buy this newest set. It's like, how many times can you be surprised that the newest set is the greatest set ever? And that's something that's always confused me personally because I've never been a fan of like watching a bunch of content where it's like, the thumbnail is open mouth. There's a stock arrow. It's like these things are going crazy. It's like, guys, they have a position in this set. Like it makes sense. But you've always really wanted to understand the why and ask that. So yeah, I don't necessarily agree with the grump. I would say maybe the tone was a little more direct than what most people are used to. But that is something I think has always been a benefit to you is coming in very straightforward, very direct. What are you doing? Whether they're willing to share or not, you at least ask the question.
yeah, that's fair. I mean, there were definitely times where I was a little bit more rude or argued with people, and ultimately, like that, it was just a waste of time. But to your point about like being the nicest in the room or whatever, like I kind of going back to the modern thing, like I realized, and going back to the whole like just grading cards is not infinitely scalable, right? So it's like, why am I spending so much time looking for cards that are harder to find mint, that less people want, that have a lower sell through rate? If my time is valuable and I'm trying to make as much money in this as possible, am I trying to be impressive to people in Discord on YouTube, or am I trying to run a business? And the answer for me is I'm trying to run a business. I personally like, and if you're a collector or something like that, like maybe, or looking to be like famous in the Pokemon space, like it probably does matter. Like you need to have like a wall behind you with, you know, tons of crazy graded cards and tons of ETBs and stuff. Like I don't care about that. Like that's not interesting to me.
Or
And
a
like,
Pikachu stuffy, you know, behind you.
yeah, yeah. So like, I mean, you know, I got the stuff I genuinely like. Like Nesto gave me that because he knows I like Kazuki. That's just like a clear file. You know, that's Kazuki art right there. That's a sealed copy of Pokemon Puzzle. It's like a strategy guide for the Game Boy game. And then these are some vintage Cardos DBZ stuff. But yeah, like I'm not really worried, or like my goal was never to be like, you know, revered as like some crazy, like, oh, he's the biggest collector in the world with the coolest collection and the rarest cards. Like that doesn't matter to me. I think that that's cool, and like I can appreciate everybody's goals in the hobby, but like my goal is to make money. And so if my goal is to make money, like why am I working hard? And like my time is limited, right? Like I run a lot of businesses. I'm a full-time student. Like I got a lot of stuff going on. I don't have time to spend 2 hours looking for some crazy rare card that's going to take 6 months to sell on my eBay. That just doesn't make any sense, right? And again, like I do a little bit of this kind of stuff still, like, you know, to your point of like trying to go outside of Pokemon. Like if I could do more DBZ, I would. Trust me. I love Dragon Ball Z, right? It's just,
I'm right there with you. If the market was actually there, absolutely.
yeah, 100%. Like I would do way more Dragon Ball Z. It's just that, again, back to the whole business point, like I can't do the same volume of Dragon Ball that I can with Pokemon. Same thing with like Yu-Gi-Oh or any of the other stuff. Like I like a lot of different things. I think a lot of different things are cool, but the liquidity on Pokemon is just unmatched. It is what it is, right? So yeah, trying to balance that to sort of like make sense. But the nice thing about the niche stuff, less people competing, usually the profit margins are kind of nuts because less people competing, less people, bigger barrier to entry because the information isn't as readily available as it is in Pokemon. So you got to do a little bit more digging to sort of get the information you need, figure out like which cards are the chase cards and all that sort of stuff. So you can balance that, right? Like you can do like 10% of the niche stuff and then the 90% of the Pokemon. The niche stuff's going to take longer to sell, but the profit margins are going to be insane. So that's sort of the balance, I would say.
Yeah, that's something that you know, you kind of mentioned it. You're running a lot of different, and I love the description of like, am I trying to be like the coolest guy in Discord or YouTube, or am I running a business? Because I think a lot of people kind of blend those lines at a certain extent. Like it's like I want to go to a card show, or I want to, you know, make my YouTube content, and I want to show the coolest, rarest stuff, whether I can sell it or not. Like I've got the most illiquid, expensive item of all time. It's like they're completely proud of that, and that's okay. Like you said, if someone's got the funds to do that and be able to say like, hey, the second I buy it, it goes to zero, like I'm good to go. I respect that all day. I mean, even Jenny Rummy Meister, like, you know, or Jin Rummy Meister, that I interviewed last week on my channel, like he's never sold a card, which is mind blowing in 2024 to even like say out loud, you know, especially for somebody who has a very high six-figure collection. Like for somebody who's just like, nope, I just find the money and I buy it to collect. That is so incredibly rare in collectibles hobbies. Like it just doesn't make sense, you know, for that point. So
Well,
one thing I guess,
really quick to kind of
yeah,
push
go for it.
back on that. I don't know if have you watched the Golden Show at all? That's on
I
Netflix.
haven't watched season two. I've watched season one, but I haven't watched season
Okay.
two.
So the one thing that really stuck out to me in season two, and again, a lot of these people with these collections are wealthy, right? Like they don't necessarily need to sell, but selling would definitely create a lifestyle change for sure. And Ken is offering these people really strong offers, and these people are like, "Oh, I don't know, I've never sold anything." And it makes me so bullish on collectibles in general because I'm like, yo, collectors are wild. Like they actually
Yeah.
just collect. I mean, these people's houses will be filled with like hundreds and thousands of these things, and they're just like, yeah, I just never thought about selling. It's wild, and like us being in the markety, businessy side of Pokemon YouTube, I think that we don't see that. But when I watched that show and saw that on an ultra high level, that I mean, dude, not to spoil it, but let's just say at the very end of the season, there's a guy
I
that's
don't
got
care about spoilers at all with this.
hundreds of millions of dollars in maybe 10 sports cards and flies Ken out. And Ken's like, yeah, so can I consign some of this stuff? And he's like, no, it's going to my kids. And again, the dude's already rich, but it's like, yo, like that's hundreds of millions of dollars
Well,
for the sports cards. Like
that's the thing though, is like at least in Pokemon, it's so rare because of the amount of eyes on it, because of the amount of conversation around selling, buying. Here's how much. I mean, how often do you hear about a card just because it's cool? Like you don't. You hear about it because it's worth X amount, or it's increased to this amount, or it's pre-selling for this, or it's dropped this much. Like, and I understand that we are definitely in a little bit more of a narrow hallway when it comes to like content and things like that. But realistically, like anything and everything Pokemon, like I mean, there's a lot of people I see like sponsored ads or just like regular accounts on Instagram or YouTube recommendations. It's all about how much you can make or how much you're selling for. Um, and I think with sports, it's a little bit different in the fact that like if you're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars, you're talking about like mantles and stuff like that. Like, that type of stuff is like it's irreplaceable. At that point, like you literally like you could sell, but like you're never going to buy that again. Versus like, oh no, should I part with my Moonbreon? Like, come on, like you're gonna have like thousands of abilities to buy that, and also like at least with Jonathan, like who I talked about, that I interviewed last week, is his whole thing is he could technically go out and buy these cards again. Now, granted, the 2001 Tropical Mega Battle Tropical Win, probably not. Like, probably realistically, he'll never see that again. Which I'm still so incredibly lucky to have seen that in person, but beyond that, I mean, even cards that are maybe in the $800 range that he has, he could buy them again, but he does not sell them. And that's something that I think is a little more unique to Pokemon because there are so many options to buy these things. I mean, every grail we've ever really heard of or know of in this hobby has pretty much come out in the last like year and a half. Like it's absolutely insane. When I start seeing PSA 10 like SSBs coming out, I'm like, what? Like these shouldn't even exist. Why is this even here? Versus like in sports, like if somebody's got a mantle or multiple Mickey mantles or something, and again, I know you say you weren't spoiling. I don't care either way, but I don't know what they have. I'm assuming Mickey Mantle has to be there, but you start looking at some of those cards, it's like there's no possible way for them to be able to purchase them back, and they're already wealthy. So it's like what they bought them for is still significantly more than maybe some of these other people that took a 10, 15-year time of buying these like rare cards that have just now become valuable. Um, so yeah, I completely agree to a certain extent, but I think that just in Pokemon, it's very difficult for people now to even kids, like, I mean, I've seen kids like, CollectCon, they're like 10, 11 years old. They pull a card and they're like ready to do a trade up challenge. Like me, I'm like, what? Like when I pulled this, I was like, no sleeve in the binder, whatever. It's just a completely different type of market. And I think everybody is paying attention to how much will it be, or how much did I lose, at this point. So, kind of pivoting a little bit, I guess, on the business side, talking about that. I know that with the wholesale business, that is something a little bit more recent, that you've dove into. So I know that, individual single cards, pretty common. I think everybody, for the most part, kind of starts in grading some stuff, and you get a few sixes and sevens back, and you're like, I don't know what the hell I'm doing, but then you kind of learn, right? But eventually, you kind of max it out. So what prompted the wholesale revenue stream, I guess, in the business? Is that because that is something that has always intrigued me. I know that English distribution is very difficult to get if you don't have brick and mortar. So with the Japanese side, how did that maybe come about, as much as you want to share? Like what prompted you thinking like I'm going to start wholesaling this stuff? Because obviously it's a lot less than you just flipping boxes, things like that. So what prompted all that?
Well, so with the grading stuff, I was kind of, when I was looking towards this year and trying to figure out like how I could grow my business, I was like, I can do more volume in grading, but like that, again, not infinitely scalable. I can only take that to a certain point. And I was thinking, like, constantly thinking like, what else could I be doing? What else could I be doing? And I remember I watched this call with this big comic seller on Whatnot, and for whatever reason, like that call just like really clicked for me. And he was talking about selling, making very low margin, but selling 700 items a day, right? And making anywhere from like 7 to 15%, which obviously, like when you're grading a card, like you're probably going to get a better percentage return, but you're not going to be able to do the same volume, right? So that really clicked for me and was like, okay, like high volume, low margin is a play, right? And then you factor in credit card rewards. And that was another thing too. I remember I can't remember if it was Dan or somebody was having a conversation. I think it was like Charlie or Jen Min or something like that. But they were talking about, you know, like that they had just got this credit card and they were like, if I cash flow, just cash flow, don't even net anything. If I cash flow $5 million through my business at a 2% credit card rate, that's $100,000 salary a year just in credit card rewards. Right. And so when you start like putting all this stuff sort of like started falling into place, and I was like, well, I'm already sourcing stuff from Japan anyways. I have like connections, so why don't I, you know, see what can happen, right? And I was seeing people like, you know, Brian Pokey NE do extremely well with that, and I was like, man, why is nobody else doing this? Like, this is kind of crazy. Like, he's the only person. I'm sure there's other people, but I'm like, why is nobody else really doing this? Like, this seems, it's obviously highly in demand, right? And, you know, sourcing from Japan in the past has been extremely risky, especially when it comes to sealed product. People are worried about like getting a scam. And I was like, all right, well, if I can provide like a trusted source for this product, let's see where it goes. And so I've been doing that for like a little over 2 months now. And it's, my business has exploded doing that. And I am so mad at myself for just having my brain completely shut off to sealed product for so long, because I was just so like, I just poo-pooed it, right? I was like, I can create a card and make more money, and like if I sell a box, like the margins aren't the same, and I was just so dead wrong about it. And so yeah, I've just been like snowballing it as much as I can, trying to build up my name. I have like a reference post pinned to like my Instagram, so that people can, you know, feel comfortable buying from me if they don't know me from YouTube or Instagram or card shows or whatever. It'll make them comfortable, because, you know, buying from Japan is risky, and it's not just risky for them, it's risky for me sometimes too, right? So I'm willing to take that risk. I'm willing to put my capital at risk and things like that, to be able to provide people with the products. And, you know, luckily nothing has gone wrong. The worst thing that's happened, just to be transparent, is when I first started, I wasn't aware of like Canadian import fees. So I quoted people in Canada prices, because it's the same price for me to ship to Canada, or from Japan to Canada, as it is from Japan to somebody in the United States. So I was like, yeah, it's the same price. And then the order hit, and I got an email from FedEx saying like, you know, these import duties are due. And because I was just starting out and I had not told them that the import duties were on them, I ate those import fees. So on like a couple orders, I broke even on, or maybe lost $50 or whatever, in this sort of like, because I wanted to make myself like look good. I didn't want to be like, oh, hey man, like there's import duties, you need to pay these, when I had already like sort of said that up front. And so now, like when people order from outside of the United States, I make sure and tell them like, hey, you know, here's the price. But if import duties do come up, if you're in Australia or Canada or, you know, the UK or something like that, you'll be responsible for those. Is that okay? But at least up front, I wanted to eat that, to sort of like, you know, make sure that I still came off as reputable and things like that. So, you know, learning curves, but luckily, like the suppliers I have are honest, good people. So I haven't been scammed or had to eat anything like that. So yeah, it's been going good so far, for sure.
No, it's good on you for eating that stuff. I mean, there's a lot of people that we've seen that kind of enter in, especially like say if they just jumped in and were like, I'm gonna wholesale product, you know, from Japan, because I have a cousin whose friend's sister's wife's aunt is over there, and I can make this happen. And the second something happens, they're like, oh well, I can't cover that, and then they just completely, you know, somebody doesn't have a good experience, they don't have a good experience, and they just bow out. So it's good that you know, as expected, like just ate that and said like, hey, it's cost doing business, learning experience. I paid, you know, I'd rather pay a few $100s to understand how to do this versus like eating that and losing business, you know, forever business, I guess what it would be. You know, and it's really interesting too with Japanese product, being able to bring that in and kind of bring that to the US market, because I know that with English distribution, one of the biggest challenges is, you know, again, they focus on brick and mortar. So like online stores, I think they closed that back in like, I think 2020. I think pretty much once the pandemic hit, because they probably got like a mass amount of applications to do that. But you also have to have, you know, certain order amounts to get a certain allocation of like certain sets. So you got to buy a bunch of tens, you got to buy a bunch of like EX boxes and stuff like that. And again, I don't know the ins and outs of your entire distribution business, but I'm assuming it's a lot easier to say like, here's the product I want, only want, I don't need to buy a bunch of tins. I don't need to buy a bunch of like extra stuff. I literally just want this particular product. I mean, is that kind of what pivots you more toward the Japanese, unofficial distribution, I guess is what I'll call it, versus like, I mean, are there any plans at all to look at English, or are those type of barriers like just, hey, it's not worth the trouble?
I mean, like it's something like I think about, but again, like I have a competitive advantage, like having, connections and just like being experienced buying from Japan as is. With English, like I don't have any sort of advantage. And even if I got like distribution, I'm a small fish, right? I can't compete with a lot of these guys that have really big distribution accounts that are going to get for a little bit lower than me. And again, like I have to sit on that product. I have to tie capital up. With what I'm doing now. Like I don't need to tie any of my own capital up, right? Even with what I'm doing with Dan, like I don't need to tie up any of my own capital. So that's sort of like a big difference between like what I'm doing. And again, like I don't need to take stuff that I don't want. If the market was in a different spot and product wasn't as available as it is now, maybe that would change. But as of right now, like things are available, and so you don't have to take any crappy booster boxes to get the booster boxes you want. You know what I mean? And that is sort of the horror story that I've heard from regular distribution. And yeah, so it's just not something that I'm entirely interested in. I think the next step, something that I've been thinking about, is getting a website going, because Instagram has been going really good. Obviously, like Dan shouting me out has helped a lot with that. But I think the next step would be to create a website and to have a place where people could come and purchase. Because right now I'm doing like 20 box minimum orders, because I'm trying to target people that sort of want like wholesale bulk orders. But if people want to buy like 5 boxes, if I had it on my website to where like I'm only having to pay 3% fees, um, I could charge a little bit more, but then be able to like fulfill smaller orders for people that just want like a box or 2 boxes to rip, right? And just to have fun, not people that are looking to invest or like any sort of B2B stuff, right? Like doing a lot of like B2B, selling to streamers, selling to people that are taking stuff to Card Party or whatever. But the average consumer right now is sort of like cut out because of my minimum purchase order size, right? So I think like potentially creating a website is and offering smaller like order amounts is something that may be like the next step for me, rather than like looking towards English. So
Well, I will say that, my hope would be is that when you do a website, which you absolutely should, to open up that extra market, I would hope you look back and kind of say the same things you said about like wholesale, like you're kicking yourself because you're like, why did I not like do this so much sooner? Because I think even like, with Instagram stories, it's great. I mean, I see some of the prices, especially that you've been posting, like 151, and it's like, guys, for anybody who's looking for Japanese product, I mean, Retro has like the best pricing by far. Like, I mean, at this point, I get so many ads for like Japanese stores. Like, it's so funny. It's like, some of them are very creative. There's a guy jumping on a counter, like doing stuff. Sometimes just a picture of a bunch of cases. And every time I click it, I'm like, this is already over market. Like, I go to their website or whatever it may be, or they're like message me, which I don't. But your pricing has always been like extremely competitive, extremely fair. When it comes to like what you're looking at, it's like you understand that you're making money, but also like, you're trying to wholesale. I mean, it makes sense. Um, but I hope that, eventually there is a website for people to go on and just purchase from you. I know that's something that, shout out Metakai. He was one of the guys who helped me with like securing some 151 cases in the beginning. And he had a website for literally just boxes. He would just update the prices fairly regularly. And I bought a few boxes here and there. I found myself going back to his site because I was like, well, what is the price today? Like maybe I'm ready to buy something. Maybe I just sold a card. So now I can go back and say, okay, well, let me buy some more sealed products. So I hope that is something in the very near future. I know I would be a customer on that just to look and see what the updates are. As much time as I spend on Instagram, like, I'll probably see it, but like for the average person, it's like, maybe I haven't checked Instagram stories in like 3 days. Like I can just go on his website and like see what it is. So, um, yeah, I would very much look forward to that happening. If you ever do start that, please let me know. I will share that across, anybody who follows me just to be able to funnel some more business to you. But um, I guess, with that being said, kind of talking about the wholesale side. So kind of going into something a little more fun. This is probably the topic I was most looking forward to talking about is sort of the diversification and collectibles that you and I both ran. And this can kind of doesn't necessarily have to focus on the business side. I think you and I both are similar in the fact that if we get into a collectible, like there's going to be some profit. Like we're still looking for the ability to make money in it. Um, Beyond Pokemon, what are you getting into? What are you buying into? Maybe you don't sell into it today, but like what are you buying and maybe you're selling a little bit into today outside of Pokemon, like collectible wise.
Definitely Dragon Ball Z for sure. Like I've always, if I go back to like my first purchases ever from Japan, it was I actually want to say it was no Pokemon. It was all like Dragon Ball Z. I think there was maybe some Mario stuff in there too, like all Cardos stuff, like vintage Japanese, sort of like rare. So that's always something that I've thought was like really cool. And so that's a small part of my business, but I try to like keep that going. Recently, I've gotten a little more choosy about like what I'll sell and what I'll put up for sale. And part of that is just because I've seen a big shift. Like when I started buying this kind of stuff, it was fairly available in Japan and it seemed cheap to me for what it was. Now, when I go back, like I was very aggressively buying like sealed Cardos boxes. I had a massive position. Like at one point, I want to say I had like 75 sealed Cardos boxes. Like I was going and for me at least, like that was a pretty big position.
That's a lot. Yeah.
And so I just really thought the stuff was cool. I felt it was undervalued and I wanted to have the sealed because my goal was to like open everything and grade it and have the best, potential at getting tens because these cards outside of boxes are very condition sensitive. So, that was sort of my goal. And again, things were fairly available back then, and not only are they like not available now, but the prices for the stuff that is available have like 10x. And this is over the course of like 2 to 3 years, right? So like and I'm not going to go back and pay those prices, right, to start like buying more of it. And so I've been getting like very choosy. And then like when I list like a 9.5 of a really nice prism, it's almost always like a Japanese whale or a Chinese whale will come and like snap it. There's no messages. There's no like, hey, would you take 10% off? There's none of that. Like they just snap it. They know what it is. The buyer pool for that like knows what that is, right? And so
Right.
now
They got a saved search. It pops up. Yeah,
yeah,
they're going for it.
exactly. And so now I'm kind of at that point to where like I've seen appreciation in this kind of stuff, price appreciation, and I'm less, I'll sell some of the lower grades. I'll sell some of the stuff that I can replace, but the stuff that I can't replace, if I do list it, I'm listing it high and I'll wait. Like I'll just sit on it. And I can insulate myself because I'm doing so much Pokemon and so much other stuff that I'm able to do that, right? Like I'm able to do that with the Dragon Ball Z stuff and like I do a little bit of Yu-Gi-Oh and stuff like that too. Like a little bit with shoes, definitely not as much as you do. But again, going back to the Golden Show, like part of what makes that dude so successful is he knows so much about so many different things. So when you can go like wider, yeah, there's a lot of opportunity out there. And so many people are so hyper focused on one thing that they miss maybe opportunities in other things. And it's kind of cool too, right? Because like I've said this before, but it's like art curation. Like I will grade cards that have never been graded before that are pop one, whether it's like some random One Piece card or some random DBZ thing or whatever, just because I think it's cool and I think somebody out there might also think it's cool. And that makes me like more excited about the hobby than grading a modern card, right? Like it's
Right.
grading
Right.
is me thinking like, whoa, this card is sick. This is a really popular character. This is really cool art. No one's graded this before. That's nuts. Or like recently, like I started grading. Nesto's probably going to kill me for this one, but I had this play cooking for like a long time, probably like 6 to 8 months ago. I started like really thinking heavily about postcards because I was seeing like Japanese Pokemon postcards that looked so cool. The arts were insane. There's multiple popular Pokemon. It's a full scene. And when people talk about the alt arts, they're like, oh, it's Pokemon in their daily life. That's why it's so cool, is it's like a whole scene of what's going on with the Pokemon. And none of these postcards were graded. And I'm like, why are people not grading these postcards? Like the art on this stuff is phenomenal. And so I was thinking about that. And then a few months later, people started grading the Van Gogh postcards, right? When the Pikachu Van Gogh thing came out. And I saw those sell really well. And I was like, oh, okay. So I bought a bunch of postcards of things that I thought were popular and thought would do well. And again, like that's not ever going to be at the same volume as me grading like the new Chase Charizard, but
Right.
that kind of
Right.
stuff is what like keeps me passionate. And I'm sure you probably have things like that where you feel this. Like I know you've done a lot of stuff with like big VHSs and different things like that. So I'd be interested to hear like what sort of stuff you've been getting into too.
Yeah, no, it's always funny when I talk about other collectibles because I don't know, I think it's more of a it's kind of ironic, you know, because when people in Pokemon hear other collectibles, they're like, "What? People pay money for that?" And then, you know, from the outside looking out on Pokemon cards, it's like, "Well, yeah, man, like people spend $5,000, $10,000 on a shiny piece of cardboard with an orange dragon on it. Like, you know, that's the same thing." With me, I know that you know, one thing that we've kind of bonded over a little bit is sneakers, right? So like I find that is the easiest money I've ever been able to do to supplement like card buying. For anybody who doesn't know, I've talked about this in a couple of lives, and I may actually do an actual video on this. On you know, I've made X amount of thousands of dollars in a year, like just doing this by basically putting a label on a box because sneakers are like one of those things that I was kind of fascinated about. I almost saw that as like how I got into like really nice whiskeys because I thought to myself I was never a whiskey drinker, and I was like, why do people sit in their like mahogany chairs and drink their bourbon and like it tastes like gasoline? Like, why do people like this? And then I started looking around and got kind of excited, started trying some stuff and really got into it. Sneakers are the same way. I was like, why do people care about shoes? Like, they're just shoes, right? And then I started seeing like, oh, I can't go and buy these at a store. Like, I can't go and just order these online. Like, they're only limited drops for 5, 10 minutes that I have to win the ability to pay retail on. Which I love. That's like immediately how you get me hooked into a collectible. So that's one thing that really is. I mean, there's like a few $100s a month, sometimes $1,000 a month. I'm making just off of shoe raffles at this point, and I'm not somebody. I'm not going to pretend like you know, oh, Peak like knows all about like the new Jordan or like this. Like, I don't care at all. All I do is like pull up StockX, see what the resale value is. If it makes sense and I'm going to make like, you know, 80, 90%, like I'm just going to go for it. Like, why not? And again, I can explain this later in like a video I may put out, but ultimately what it is just I enter, I pay for a shoe. It gets shipped to me from Nike or Adidas in like 3 days. I don't even open the box. I just put the free eBay label because I already posted on eBay and it sells. eBay provides you free labels for sneakers, so I just put it on the box and then I ship it out. And I've made like a few $100s. Like it's the easiest money I've ever made when it comes to like anything in collectibles, but more of a supplement than anything. So that sneakers is always going to be something I think I'll do like probably forever at this point because it's so easy. Um, graded VHS is something I'm always kind of keeping my eyes out on, and Golden especially actually in their auction, especially with the show ramping up. Um, I guess one thing I'll kind of like spoil something I'm still watching to buy, but there's a it's not the OOG print, but it's the one of the original VHS releases of Jaws, the movie, and they have an MCA logo and it's blood red, and it's like got white MCA labels all over it. It's like or watermarks, and it's sealed, and like it's a cool looking VHS. Like that's the fun thing is like you said, like you can kind of hold out on some of these things that you have and just not sell them. Like that's how I feel about VHS. Like I'll list them for crazy prices, and if somebody wants to buy it, cool. But the cool thing about that one is like I was looking at resale value recently, and they're selling for like 680, 750, but then the raw sealed copies are selling for like $150, and it costs about 60, $65 to grade a VHS. Granted, they've got to be decent quality, but I mean the margin there is insane, right? And it's like that same thing with buyer pool. It's like there's a small amount of people, but they want these copies. So VHS is definitely one. One thing I've really actually I've talked about this because it's within the last like month. But one thing I've been looking at is original scripts for movies that I really like. So this is apparently a big market, and it's people who are either extras or sometimes even main characters who will sell the original copy of the script they were given. and being able to pick those up for movies that I really like, it's like they look different. Like there's a lot of reprinted scripts and stuff like that, but there's a couple of companies, I think Empire Scripts or something is one that they sell like authenticated, like this is originally from the movie. So that's more of like a super collector's item for me. But then also like I think like, wow, if there's a way I could get this and then autographed by like whoever I want that was in the movie and then like encapsulated, like that would be amazing. Like I would love to do that. So those are probably the main things. I mean, I've gotten into. Obviously, Pokemon is going to be one of the primary things. Dragon Ball, I'm not really buying anything. There's a ton of stuff I want to buy, but I know that like there's almost no resale value. And that's like the unfortunate thing, man. I know that you're a huge Dragon Ball fan as I am. Like it's my favorite IP, even over Pokemon. But for that particular market, that was the sad things. I definitely bought and sold a lot in Dragon Ball for a certain period of time, probably 6, 7 months when it was really at its peak. Um, and now it's like, I mean, I see booster boxes that I was selling for 170, 180 bucks. I think they're selling for like $45. And it's like, there's God rares in them. I'm like, what happened to this market? You know, it's a classic example of like mishandling an IP and like product and like it's just interesting. And that's kind of I think the crux of kind of our whole conversation is Pokemon really is the most stable when it comes to being able to like profit and there's opportunities available and all of that. And all the other collectibles that we kind of engage in are more like supplements, I guess, to that.
Yeah, 100%. It's funny you say that with the dragon. Did you ever get into phone cards? Like, have you looked at like any of the Dragon Ball like phone cards at all, like stuff like this?
They're so cool, dude. I've looked at quite a few. I like those, and I like the ones that come out of the like the video games and stuff. Like there's one of Goku like from GT. He's like doing this, and I don't. It
Okay.
like comes out of some sort of vending machine or something. But the only phone cards I've really looked at have been vintage ANA and JR Stamper. I like Pokemon phone cards because I really like those, and similar to the postcards, like amazing art, very cool. Some are graded, some are not. But I'm just like, man, again, it comes to a capital problem. It's like I could buy up like so many of these, but I'm like, do I want to do that or do I want to buy liquid stuff? So yeah.
Yeah, same thing in Pokemon. Like, there's a lot of really cool Pokemon phone cards too. That was a market I got in. I don't know, probably same time, maybe like 6 or 8 months ago. Like, I had always been familiar with them, but I'd never really looked at them and just sort of like had seen them in Japan and stuff like that, and was like, all right, like these arts are pretty cool. Again, like you can't go crazy with it. You can't grade like 100 phone cards and sell them within a week or a month or something like that. But there are definitely collectors for them, and I think it's people that just like really appreciate the art, because a lot of the time the art is something that you can't get on a card. It'll have like
Right.
multiple, in the case of Pokemon, like it's like original Sugimori art with like multiple trainers and multiple Pokemon on it. And yeah, I don't know, like they're really cool pieces for sure. So yeah, there's all sorts of niche stuff. It's funny, man. Like, if this is sort of like a random offshoot, but like if anybody out there watching this is at all bearish on collectibles markets at all, like when I was back to the Golden Show, they did a Titanic. It was around the time of like it was it was either the anniversary of the actual ship crashing or the anniversary of the movie. I can't remember, but bottom line, like they were putting a block together with all these different Titanic items, right? So they had like Winslet.
Genius.
Yeah, Kate, like they had like Kate Winslet's dress, but then they had random stuff, right, from like the actual Titanic. And one of the items was like just a teacup, and it was broken in half. So it's like broken in half, like piece of glass, ceramic, whatever. They valued it at $1,000. And I'm like, this is a broken in half cup. People are out here spending $1,000 on a broken in half cup. The market is strong, people. The market in like that show made me so bullish. Maybe too much so, but like seeing things like that, I was like, you got to be kidding me. People are out here paying $1,000 for a broken cup. Like, come on, man.
But here's the thing: they're not paying $1,000 for a broken cup. They're paying $1,000 for a story, and that's why I've always like focused so much on like cards that have a very unique story or a very difficult acquisition thing you had to do to get a card. That was when I started with promos. I was like, is it really hard to get? Like, it's one thing to pull like, oh, I graded a Black Star promo that was given out at like, a Toys R Us, right? Like, oh, I got a 10. This is cool. It's a non-hollow, whatever. But if it's like, oh, like for JR stamp routes, I've talked about those like ad nauseum at this point. It's like, oh, I had to go 30 train stations to get a stamp on this folder for me to even get the card. Like, and the conditional rating is super tough. Like, a teacup from the Titanic, like some old ladies bought that or some guys bought that and it's in their house whenever they get it. And they're going to go, why do you have a broken teacup? What's wrong with that? And they go, fancy US. Like they're purposely putting it in sight. So somebody like you will be like, what? Why do you have a broken teacup? And they're like, let me tell you the story of, and I'm sure they embellish it. They're like, well, this was actually the captain's teacup. And it was, they can say whatever they want, but it is authenticated to be from the Titanic. So I think a lot of people just value the ability to tell a story with an object, which I think is really the true definition of collectibles. Like there's some people who just collect stuff because they collect it, but like I think where the real value is, at least, and this is still within the business side of things. Like if you're looking for things that you think have value, it's like, can the end consumer, assuming that it's a consumer not flipping, can they tell a story about what you're selling? Like, does it have a fun story behind it? Because I think that, even the ANA Airlines phone cards that I've seen, I'm like, that's cool. You had 2 months to fly on a plane and you got this phone card. It wasn't always guaranteed. Like you just had to get them during this, promotional period. It's a fun thing to do. And granted, this is not like a scalable liquid, opportunity.
I black labeled an ANA phone card.
Did you really?
Yeah, I black labeled one of the ANA Pokemon phone cards. And
did you sell it?
Yeah, I sent it straight to auction because I didn't know what to price it at, and I was like, this is super.
There's
liquid.
no price.
I'll just like I'll let people fight over it or whatever. But yeah, I agree. Like I think a lot of that. I think a lot of the story behind stuff is cool. But that appeals more to like the whales and people that are like, really into the niche stuff or whatever. And that's okay too. But like the general population, back to what we were talking about, like you can go buy a modern Zelda game and grade it or whatever. They love Zelda, right? Like if you put Zelda in plastic and it gets a high grade, they're going to like it, right? It takes somebody like you to like, okay, well, I love Zelda. Let's take it down to the next level and then find Interplay, right? So like that's certain people will dig deeper because that, is interesting to them. And a lot of people are just surface level, which is okay too. Like I'm not trying to hate on that at all, but it takes a certain.
Well, the bulk of our clientele, so yeah, let's not hate on them.
Yeah, exactly. So, but a certain people will go down the rabbit hole, go to the next level, and go below the surface and find the rare things with the cool stories and stuff like that. And that's what keeps the passion side of this alive. But like being able to sort of separate those things and like, this is the passionate side of it for me, this is the business side, because when you try to like mesh them, that's when you start arguing with yourself, right? To your point
it's
earlier,
so hard.
like, oh, why is this card worth so much? It doesn't make any sense to me. If you just look at all this stuff as widgets and just like the market is the market. Like I was listening to, I can't remember who it was, but I want to say it was like a hedge fund manager. He was on this, I watched this YouTube channel. It's called like The Compound and Friends. And it's dudes that work at like Ritholtz Wealth Management. They have like fund managers and big investors on and all that sort of stuff. And one thing that this guy said really stuck out to me. And he was like, conviction is the scariest word in this industry, because what it implies is that something that the market doesn't. And it's the same exact thing in collectibles, right? Like if you have such conviction that you're right and the market is right, like that's scary, because the market is made up of millions of people, billions of dollars. And for you to like think that you have it right and everybody else has it, maybe you do, but that's scary, right? And so just giving in and understanding that like this is the market, this is the way things are. It's the path of least resistance, I would say. So yeah, sort of random there, but thought I would throw that in because it really like stuck out to me. It was like stop fighting the current, people. But
no, it's good to know. I mean, that is one thing I think we all struggle with when we first get into, because anybody can start an LLC. It's very simple. It's a couple $100 spending in your state, you're good to go, like whatever. And I think the difficult thing is like, if anyone is looking into starting a business, like making their hobby profitable, first off, you may agree or disagree. I think everyone should just start a business to get the tax write-offs like immediately. Like there's no point, if you are going to buy something to make money, do not do that at your own expense. Like literally just go out and write off as much as you can. Like if you're not sure, look up YouTube videos. There's so much content on how to maximize like being a reseller in general. Daily Refinement is a great YouTube channel. Shout out those guys. Like, if you just want daily stuff, it kind of helps you get motivated. But like on the tax stuff, there's so much opportunity for it. But that is one thing that going into it, if you are going to go into it as a business or actually purchase things to not hold to actually make money, have a purpose behind it and do not. I mean, I know the whole thing is like buy the card, not the grade, like all this other buy only stuff you like. Like I get that, but you have to purchase with intent. You have to ask yourself the question, why am I buying this? Because I mean, we've all been guilty of this, right? Like I found the next amazing play, but I'm also like, on page 8 of eBay listings of looking at like the most niche whatever, and I think that that is something like when you're looking at a business. I mean, again, kind of that question I mentioned earlier that I asked myself is like, do you want high volume, high liquidity, or do you want very niche and high profitability? And there is a middle ground. You can't have both, but it's more about like, you have to make that decision before you just start expending capital and stuff because you will literally spend every dime you have and not know when it's coming back. That's the hard part. And then you're gonna be one of those guys who, his eBay auction ends on a Tuesday morning, and I'm gonna pick up your stuff for like pennies on the dollar, and I'm gonna love it, and then I'm gonna flip it correctly. So I think you bring up a good point. Is like, being when you start kind of muddying the waters on like what I like and what the market likes, you're never going to know 100% what the market likes. Like you may have an idea, and for a time you may be right, but as we've seen between waifus, Moonbreon, all kinds of just random stuff that has skyrocketed and then immediately nosedived after like 3 months. Like we've seen the ups and downs at least enough, and a lot of people have been in here longer than us. Like I've definitely seen more, but in our time, it's like we've seen the trends happen. People buy them, and it's almost like by the time you get your grades back, you're like, I'm ready to cash in. Like I spent a premium, but I'm gonna make a ton. They're crashing 60%. So just got to keep that in mind. I mean, there's a lot of timing involved. There's a lot of like why I'm buying this product, and there's a lot of what is the intent of me buying this? Is it to flip immediately? Is it do I need to grade? I need to plan 45 days out. That type of stuff. Um, Mr. Kite had a good question, which appreciate you jumping in, man. I don't think I've seen you on the channel before. He said, "Would you guys have any advice on making sourcing singles less dreadful?" I feel like I have to weed through so many sellers that are firm at 90% plus on top of getting the occasional PSA 9 gets draining. So I guess you're asking kind of almost two questions is like sourcing singles less dreadful, meaning you're looking for PSA 10 cards, which I think we're all in that struggle, man. Like, I'm not gonna lie to you. Like, PSA nines are hard. It's like what makes it a nine, etc. So I guess I'll speak, or retro. I'll let you speak on it. Being able to weed through some of these sellers that are firm at 90%. I mean, I don't want you throwing out the secret sauce too much, but like, how are you getting cards at a discount, retro? Like, how are you finding raw cards at a discount at this point?
Well, in person, like cash is king, right? And if you're gonna buy multiple things from somebody, like sometimes people will definitely throw you a deal if you're like, hey, I want these 5 cards, I have cash. I personally don't go like super crazy low with a low ball. Like if everything is stickered to 500, I'm not going to be like, would you do 350? That's just not, and maybe like I'm losing money because I'm not doing that, but I might be like, hey, would you do like 450 and then let them talk me up to like 475? Because if like I already think the cards are going to grade at 10 anyways, I'll pay, I'll pay full market, right? Like I'm able to pre-grade them in person, and if the margin between full market and a PSA 10 makes sense, I'm already willing to pay $500. So at that point, anything below market, like even if they knock $25 off and I only save 5%, I'm happy with that, right? So like that's one thing I would say. But when it comes to like sourcing online, it's tough. I don't know if you can hear that. My girlfriend's cat is whining, but
It's all good.
yeah, so like that's one thing when you're sourcing in person, and like relationships matter. So like if you have card shops near you or whatever, like go in and maybe like ask them what sells for them, see if there's anything you can provide them with, maybe go in, support them, buy a few packs or something like that, chat the owner up, whatever, and then go in consistently so that they know you, they know their face, build a relationship, they'll be more willing to deal with you. There's no like secret to getting like PSA 10s every time online, right? It's just like looking at the card as closely as you can, trying to get as many good pictures as you can so you can kind of determine it. But at the end of the day, like there is some element of gambling in there too. Another thing I would say is like you don't always have to grade either, right? Like if you are doing a lot of sourcing on eBay, go buy binder collections, right? Like you, especially like modern, go buy people's modern binder collections. And with English, especially, you don't even need to sit and take the time to list. You can go to TCG Player. You don't have to take any photos. You go to TCG Player and it just auto populates. You don't even have to take any pictures. So you can buy a $350 binder, get $500 worth of singles out, and it might sell within a month. Like you might sell through most of that collection if it's like ultra modern chase cards and stuff like that. You might sell with that or through that within a month and make a decent margin on that versus like you send the cards off to PSA, then you're waiting a month and a half. A certain percentage of those cards are going to come back 9. You see what I'm saying? So it doesn't always have to be, it has to be a PSA 10 or bust. Like there's other opportunities out there, especially if you're primarily like doing your sourcing online. So that's that. Hopefully that was helpful. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I agree with everything you said. I think that yeah, Mr. Kite, I mean, when it comes to sourcing singles less dreadful, which is just funny the way you worded that. But you know, from my experience, I primarily purchase on eBay. Obviously, there's a couple of examples I'll touch on when it comes to buying outside of eBay, but when it comes to eBay specifically, I found a very there's two ways you go about it, and one, you know, kind of is interesting. If you can find that person, you know, other than eBay, they're around, they've got a social presence. That's always a plus. But not to dive too much into that. The best way that I found is, you know, looking through someone's store saying, like, hey, I want this one card, right? Like, say it's a $30 card. You're like, hey, I really, this is it. I've been looking for it. I think it, you know, meets the condition. I don't want to pay $30. Cool. Go through their store and find other stuff you want, and then message them on the card that you do want and say, like, hey, I'm looking at buying this. Can you do X amount? And just discount the amount that you want to pay. So say if it's like, I don't know, you want 10 $30 cards, for example, and you're like, could you do like, you know, 245 on these if I just bought them out? Because one thing that is beneficial on eBay is somebody could have just had these sitting forever and they just have never sold them. And a lot of people, including myself, like I don't have an actual true eBay store. Like I have an eBay, but I don't pay for like a store level. So I can't just run like 10% off on everything or whatever. And there's a lot of people like myself on there who maybe they're willing to move it at that point. They're like, you know what? I forgot that was even on my store or my eBay page. So yeah, I'll let all these go if you're buying all this stuff. Like that's a really easy way to get less than 90%, you know, comps on that. Um, so that's what I recommend on eBay. I mean, to give you kind of a real world example, like outside of eBay, I mean, there was one place I went. I took my kids to this like trampoline park or whatever. And next door, there's like it's called like the Learning Center, and it's like they sell like a bunch of, I don't know, no, it's franchise or if you've ever heard of it retro, but basically they sell a bunch of toys. It's like a toy store, but they have Pokemon there, and so like you know they're playing, and I tell my wife, I'm like, I'm gonna walk next door and look at Pokemon cards, and she's like, okay. I hate you, but all right, whatever. So I walk over there and I'm at the front counter. They have their Pokemon in the back. So there's no Pokemon. I'm like, did they get rid of this? So I walk at the front register and they just have a sign that says 50% off all Pokemon products. And we're talking like $49.95 ETBs, packs are 250 for like 4 or 5 different sets. So I go in and spend like, I don't know, I think retail would have been like $450 and I got it half off. Good prices, decent deals, you know, whatever. I get to rip a bunch of product and get some stuff to grade to send off, which I did. But then I was thinking like that next day, I was like, why are they selling 50% off on Pokemon? Like this makes no sense. This is like the highest selling IP. Every store is always sold out. So I called the store actually. Like I was working and I was like, you know what? I'm gonna call. So I said, hey, I was in there yesterday and you guys have 50% off. Like, why are you guys doing that? And they were like, oh, the owner ordered like way too much product and is trying to scale back their stuff. So then I actually got the owners, I was like, can you give the owner my email and my phone number? Like, let's talk to me. And like, I'm in the process of doing this, but I got an email that night from the owner and she was like, yeah, I heard that you were interested in my stuff and like sent me a whole list of stuff. And we're working out like an entire deal to like basically her liquidate that product to me. None of that would have happened if I hadn't just picked up the phone and been like, you want to sell your stuff? Like, so at the end of the day, I guess my point would be is like, just asking. I mean, obviously don't insult somebody. Like if they got a car listed for $500, like don't go, I'll give you $100. Like final offer, I know what you have. Like don't do that. But like there's ways to negotiate this stuff where I think you'd be surprised at how many prices on eBay are hopeful prices or starting points. And that's how you should view all of these is like, I mean, some are going to be market, but some are like, this is around where I'd want to get it, but I'm willing to come down like upwards of 20%. Like if somebody's going to buy it with something else. So long-winded answer. Obviously, Retro spoke exactly truthfully on PSA nines. Like, I mean, you're going to get nines, man. Like that's the important. Like you're never going to guarantee yourself a 10 because it's subjective. It's a grader. If he had his coffee that morning, you'll get a 10. If he didn't, you get a 9. Like that's just how it goes. So, yeah, a little bit of a rant, but that's hopefully gives you a couple different examples of it.
Yeah, I mean, cards that like are perfect are gonna get 9s. Like I've cracked plenty of cards
100%.
that I was like, this has no business getting. I've had stuff that got like 7s and 8s, and I'm like, what? Like this had no business. Like fresh out the pack stamp box promos that I've got like an 8 on, and I'll send it back and it'll get a 10 the next time.
Yep.
You know what I mean? So like, it's yeah, man. Like sometimes people think they see something that isn't there, or like Peek said, like maybe they're just in a bad mood. Like it is all done by people. It is all subjective. So like you can't let it like get you down. If you're losing money, like that's if you're grading percentage of 10s is too low to where like you're not making money and you're losing money, like then you need to sort of like reassess, reevaluate or whatever. But one bad return, like it's bound to happen. And sometimes like when you get a bunch of good returns, it's good to start like insulating yourself because then it's like, okay, I'm due for maybe like a bad one in the future. But again, like that goes back to having like multiple streams of revenue. Like when you're solely relying, like when this PSA sub has to hit or it's going to sink you, that's not a good spot to be in, right? So if you have multiple sources of revenue, multiple outs, multiple options, that to me is what really helps you scale and what can really sort of make you successful. And yeah, like that's definitely helped me out. And when I started too, like I would do best offer on things on eBay, and now I don't do any best offer. Now people still message me and be like, hey, would you take this for this? And sometimes I will, sometimes I won't. But if it's a good card and it's in a good grade and you're priced at low list, buy it now on the market, let it sit there, let it sell. Like so many people are like, oh, I'm gonna auction it. It's like, why? Like I've seen, especially on modern stuff, like I've seen people take like 15-18% under market on alt arts because they want to auction them. And in my mind, I'm like, okay, well, these people are probably like not insulated.
Leveraged.
Yeah, they need to like get their money back quickly to pay off a credit card or whatever. But it's like, dog, if you list a popular card, low list, buy it now, like what, and you make a quality listing, it's gonna sell. Like you don't need to force the auction or anything like that. And over time, that really compounds. People are like, okay, well, if you can auction and take 10 less percent, it's like, dude, you do 10 less percent on 10 cards, 20 cards, 50 cards, 100 cards. That adds up big over time, right? And if you're trying to grow business and you're trying to really grow your capital, be willing to sit on things and let them sell for a fair market price. Like don't paper hands things, right? And then another thing too is like maybe it's a card that you like and is popular, but not a lot of other people are grading it, but there is decent demand for it. And if you auction your copy, you're competing with yourself and you're ruining the market for your future self, because now when you go to list your next copy, then you're having to compete with the low auction that you just sold it at, right? So like but again, that also comes like insulating yourself, having multiple streams of revenue and things like that, and being comfortable with sitting and letting things like, I'll have people message me on Instagram and they're like, yeah, I listed this and and it's been a week and it hasn't sold. And I'm like, dog, these are collectibles. It's like, what are you talking about?
It's been a week. It's been a week.
You're gonna have to wait longer than a week sometimes, man. So like I think a lot of people get like a little paper handy. You got to be willing to wait. But one thing I wanted to go back to, we're talking about like separating like the passion for like when I look at a lot of like the biggest businesses, like when I look at like a Rusty or even like Charlie, like I remember Charlie, I think this was in like a Pokenomics Zoom or something like that. But I've always had like a lot of respect for Charlie and love to like listen to him talk. Very thoughtful dude. like the way he thinks and enjoy listening to him talk. And unfortunately, like we don't get to hear a lot from him on like long form sort of things, which is a shame because I'd like to hear more from him. But anyways, one of the things I remember him saying, and again, Charlie has crazy cards, right? Like crazy cards,
Dude,
like a crazy collection.
The amount people have no idea. Like absolutely no idea.
Yeah, like insane stuff. But when I remember Charlie talking about like a couple really massive plays that he did, and one of them was remix bout booster boxes. And so again, like that's separating. Like he's got all these crazy signatures. I'm sure he's got crazy promos and all sorts of stuff in his collection, right? But his business, he's over here buying remix bout boxes, right? Because it's got Blastoise, Charizard, and Venusaur on the front of it. It was cheap. It was a good set. He saw value there and he wailed out. Same thing with EV Heroes, wailed out on EV Heroes. So again, and same thing with Rusty. Like sometimes I'll see Rusty sell stuff and it'll be like a CGC 10 non-holo of a popular Pokemon from a modern set. And again, like Rusty, everybody's like, oh, Rusty, right? Rusty's got insane stuff, uncut sheets, trophy cards, like all different types of stuff. Rusty's selling CGC 10s of Espeon.
He's a businessman.
Yeah, from the newest set that just came out. And so like understand, like there is a demand for this and you can have both. You can be the guy that's got this crazy collection and has the uncut sheets and all the rare promos and worlds cards and stuff like that and still sell CGC 10 Espeon non-holo from the newest set, right? So yeah, I don't know, like that's something I think is interesting. And yeah, so just wanted to throw that in there.
No, it's good. It's good tips and everything, and a good way to think about like how you can navigate all this, and even on the PSA thing too. And one thing I'll kind of counter what you said on eBay, but with PSA and specifically, and this kind of goes back to Mr. Kite's question about PSA 9s, things like that. If you will only make money if you hit a PSA 10, limit how many of those you send. I couldn't tell you how many people are like, all right, I pulled all these cards. I'm going to send off my min 20, 20 cards or whatever. They all have to hit 10s for me to make money. Like you will lose. I'm sorry. Like you need to make sure that like you can never guarantee a 10. Like there's always 10s that I've gotten. And I'm like, wow, that got a 10. And there's even more that I'm like, that should have got a 10. Why is it an 8? Like you said, especially with modern cards, it's so odd and there's never a guarantee. So I've never understood sending stuff that it's like if there's a PSA 9, I'm losing money. Like I'm going to send just 20 of those. Don't do that. That's literally the definition of leveraging yourself and gambling. You might as well go and buy, let's see, it's $14, to grade a card. So multiply that times 20, go buy that amount of scratch off tickets. You'll probably win more. Like it makes no sense to go and do that. I mean, just be risk adverse and like, yeah, you can take a few leaps here and there. Like, hey, I think I've got some really clean copies, but it only takes like a few of those grading orders to hit your card or whatever your bank account, however you're paying for it. And you don't have any more capital to like spend. And then you got to liquidate these garbage cards for $1. I mean, and that's the thing is like, I'm not even like judging that. I mean, there's been cards I've gotten that I just had a Mewtwo that I've literally tried to auction for like 4 or 5 weeks or something. It's a PSA 6. It's a Mewtwo promo from the from 151, like the English side, like the ultra premium collection. It's a PSA 6. It was the only one. I got a couple of 10s, got some 8s, 9s, liquidated all those. But this PSA 6, it sold for $5. That's my starting bid on all my auctions. So for $5, guy didn't pay. Had 100% feedback. Didn't pay for a $5 card. So like, just know like if I was stuck with like 20 of those and my capital was legitimately tied up in that, like you're in trouble when it comes to that. The other thing on eBay specifically, so you mentioned like, buy it now, low list. So I've completely abandoned all of that. I don't low list at all. And I've seen a ton of success on this. So all I do is, and this is probably being pretty transparent, but we're an hour and a half in, whatever. If you're in here, here's your exclusive, whatever. I'm just promoting all of my listings now by like 10%. And I'm marking my price up like 12%. And they're all selling. Like I've sold probably half of my eBay page. I don't have a lot of stuff on it, but I've sold like half of it in the last month. So I'm literally waiting for PSA to give me my return back now to get more stuff. And the stuff is selling like very quickly. Like I will end it. I was low list forever. I'll add a 10% promotion, you know, increase the price by 12% and it sells. Because I
Yeah,
think what I've
yeah,
it's I heard Dan mention it and I'm like, I'm gonna try this
yeah,
out. And it's literally because you think about like again, missing the forest for the trees, right? It's like I think, oh, everybody's going in here and sorting by the lowest price. Like they're all everybody's trying to maximize their dollar. Sometimes it's just like Mewtwo card. Oh, that's the first one. Oh, it's $100. That's cool. Done. And like that happens so much more often than what people realize. And so you talk about like they're taking like 18% below market or 10% below market. If you're marked up 12 over what you want to pay, you can still discount your card and still get the price that you were originally wanting to like get anyway. And I do that with any like sneakers, especially. Like that's one thing that like nobody promotes them for some reason. So like I'll go in and be like 50, $60 above the same exact shoe, same exact size, and mine sells immediately. And I see they're still listed and they just sit there and like lower the price until, like 3 days later, I don't even have the shoe in hand to ship yet. And they're already selling for like 50, $60 lower than what I sold mine for. And
yeah.
all because it promoted those things.
That's a good point. There's a few other like intangibles too. Like sometimes if for like raw cards or something, like if it's a new set, this mainly with Japanese, but a lot of the time, like if low list on the raw card is like $9.99 or something, you can list it like $11.99 because you're from the US and people will pay an
Absolutely.
extra because they're like scared maybe about like, oh, I don't want to buy it from Japan. And not just Japan, like if you have a card and like the only other ones listed are outside of country, people will feel like a little bit more comfortable purchasing from the US. So like that's another time where you don't necessarily have to be buy it now low list too, for sure. So yeah,
Well,
that's a
to
good
speak
point.
to that, Japanese stores, I buy a ton of Master Ball reverse hollows. Like I still buy them regularly. I have no problem saying because there's so many available, but like, dude, they take like at a time. There was a point where it was taking like 4 to 6 weeks for like a $12 Master Ball card to get to me. So like, if I knew that like going in, and I could pay $2 more, like you just using that example for a US guy to ship it to me, and I'll get it in a week. I would do that all day. So that's a really good point. I mean, US, there is a premium. Um, if you're in Australia, for some reason, all your cards sell for more. So lucky you guys, like Pokemon Steven and Kai. But US, yeah, you could absolutely benefit. And I usually don't recommend doing this at titles, but if you can fit US seller on some of these Japanese products, man, that is like there's your guaranteed premium. I don't know if you see that. You sell a lot more Japanese
Yeah,
products, but
I do. Yeah, I definitely do that as well. Especially if it's like a quantity listing, and I'm gonna have like multiple of the card. I'll put US seller. And another thing like people do too is they'll just use stock images, and it's like it takes you. To me, like if I'm gonna make this sale, like I never use stock images. People want to see the actual card they're getting. In my mind, I'm sure there are people using stock images on cards that are selling hundreds and hundreds of copies, but for me personally, I'm like, yeah, I'm willing to take the picture. I'm not so big that I don't have time to like take, a quick front and back picture, crop it and upload it or whatever. So, yeah, I mean, like just little things or whatever where people feel more comfortable and are willing to buy from you. But to your point too about like if it has the PSA 10, it's going to wreck you. This is actually something that I kind of like learned recently, like talking to Squeaks has been like very done very well specking on raw cards, like buying large positions in raw cards that he thinks are undervalued and think could like trend up over time or whatever. And for him, like he's willing to sit on it, right, and wait for it to appreciate. But one thing that he has said is like it, grading should be the cherry on top kind of thing, and that provides you such a buffer. And so now when I look at like plays that I'm going to make, I try to buy as many things as possible to where if they're coming in and they're not gradable, I could turn around, sell them on eBay and still make money raw. And so when you start like, and then that provides you like a layer of insulation, or at least like break even, right? Like if you're losing money, if you have to sell it raw, it's like, oof. And not only that, but like if you're at the point to where it's like I have to grade this and it has to hit a 10, but you think it might have a chance at a 9, like you're tying up, not only are you tying up your initial capital for what you spent on the car, but you're tying up an extra $15 for another month, 2 months for, right? So it's like, well, would you rather like lose $1 now, or would you rather like sink an extra $15 and then lose like an extra $20 in 2 months, right? And so like that whole time value of money thing, I don't think people think about that as much, but that all sort of factors in. Green Shiz had a question.
I was just pulling that up. Yeah, I said, question retro. What do you want your main focus of business to be in 12 months? Example: 60 grading and 40 sealed Japanese. So, yeah, however many slices you want in your pie, I guess, to share. Like maybe he's talking more revenue streams than anything.
Yeah, well, the sealed Japanese revenue has been pretty nuts, so that's already like a good chunk of the business. I would say like the main three things right now are like eBay, the wholesale, and then dealing with a local guy, and that's primarily like raw, like buying him a bunch of raw stuff, and I would say, yeah, probably around 60-40, but like maybe 50-50. And with grading now, like I'm at the point to where I'm kind of starting to shift towards only things that I can sort of do extremely repeatably. So like large chunks of whether it's like a promo or a new chase card or whatever. Like I don't want to have a 50 card PSA sub coming out where it's 50 different cards. Ideally, it's like 10 different cards, 5 copies of each. And when you get to list, right, like one sells, revise listing, change quantity from 0 to 1, upload a new cert number, and just like over and over and over and over again, right? And that reduces my time. And like I have to be conscious too, because like school's coming back in the fall, right? So I'm going to be like full time with school again. Like I don't have time, especially with all this stuff and how the business is growing. Like I don't have time anymore to be spending hours and hours on sourcing cards and things like that. So I need to work smarter, not harder. And the sealed Japanese thing, like, yeah, like I definitely want that to continue to grow. And I think YouTube too, like I need to get to the point to where like YouTube is monetized. Not that that's ever going to get to the point that I'm going to make like crazy money on it, but it all sort of overlaps.
What's time value?
Yeah, and if people see me on YouTube and feel comfortable with me and are willing to buy from me because they see me on YouTube, they watch my content and they see that like I'm doing good business, I'm not scamming people, like I'm a trusted source, that makes me more money, right? So it's worth the time that I'm spending to make videos, shoot vlogs, things like that. So it all sort of like works in together. Yeah, having multiple revenue sources is really the cheat code. I'm still not like full time, like I still do other things as well, but I'm getting to the point to where like I couldn't have gone full time before just grading and flipping singles and graded cards and stuff like that, but I am getting to the point to where like if things continue to scale, I could potentially go full time because I have multiple revenue sources. And I, for me at least, for like what I would feel comfortable with, like that's the only way that I could do it. Like I don't think I could just focus on one thing and go full time and sort of like forsake all the other things that I do. So yeah, and I mean like you got a good job and wife and kids and stuff like that too. So like this being like a supplemental, like you probably have a level two to where like I'd need to be making X amount of money doing this for it to even make sense for me to like not be doing the other stuff I'm doing, like get rid of my and insurance and all the stuff that comes along with having like a full-time gig too. So I think that it's like sexy to say like, oh, I do Pokemon full time or whatever, but it really sit and think about like what your goals are in life and like what you would have to give up to sort of make that happen. So yeah, it's kind of.
I think it's a really good way to put it. I mean, to clarify, at least on my side, I will never do full time collectibles ever. I don't care how much I could possibly make, only because volatility and not even if it was myself, like say if I'm just single guy like doing this, like I just couldn't justify putting my entire financial future. This comes into diversification. Like we're zooming out almost. It's like I couldn't put it into something that feels like it could be temporary at any point. And nothing against like any of the guys that we both know that are full time, they're extremely successful. I mean, like Nick Old School Pokemon, you talk about work ethic and like really building something out. Like that guy is a workhorse. I would never want that. Uh, my my goal personally, and this is more just sharing for anybody who's watching live or watching back, thinking about doing this as a business, like and use me as an example in this. Like if you ever want to get into the business aspect of this and make it profitable, it doesn't mean that the long term goal always has to be to do it full time. Like I know that it sounds fun to work with cards constantly, but eventually it all just becomes numbers. Like you become completely numb to this. Like your passion that you have, maybe if that's kind of what's pushing you into like, I just want to do this all the time. Like you're basically giving up your passion and turning it into profit, which is kind of in the title of this video. Like that's really what you will do. It will not be the same. It is not fun. Talk to anyone who owns a brick and mortar like card store or does this full time. Like it is all about the numbers. Like, sure, is it cool? Is it a fun way to make money? Sure. Like it's a lot better than sitting in a cubicle 8 hours a day. But if you're able to sit at that cubicle 8 hours a day and like maybe you work on collectibles like 2 hours a night, maybe 10 hours a week, 5 days a week, I mean, at that point, like that is a lot more enjoyable in my eyes than doing cards realistically probably 60, 70 hours a week because it's nonstop, especially if you're working with the international market like retro is. It's like, Japan's awake when you're asleep.
Yeah,
Like
I
you've
was
got to
I was
be like,
just gonna say that, like, dude, I'm up like right when I get off of this or whatever, I'll be on Instagram, I'll be texting people, like waiting for people from Japan to respond, like exactly 100%. Like you have to be up. I have to wake up like early in the morning and respond to stuff. So yeah, and I mean, like, to be honest, like you can have both. And to your point about like you might think like it sounds fun or whatever. You can have both. Like if you're making, like, let's say you're making $100,000 a year at your day job, right? You can still grade cards on the side. Like you can still interact with the hobby on the side. And let's say you're making $1,000 a month, 12K a year annualized or something like that. Like that's a 12% raise for something that you enjoy doing, and you don't have to sacrifice anything, right? Like you don't have to sacrifice your guaranteed thing. You don't have to give yourself so much exposure to all this like crazy volatility and stuff like that too, right? So that was definitely a good point. Like you can do both. You can have fun. You can make money on this, but you don't need to put all your eggs in one basket, right? And the guys, like you said, the guys that are doing this full time, like they've built this stuff out for so long, have so many connections, so many sources of revenue, but they're working hard. I think a lot of the time,
nonstop.
yeah, it's really easy to look at people like Dan or Nick or Z or what, and like especially Nick. Like Nick is arguably the most disarming human being you'll ever talk to. No ego, never brags, never talks about like the money he has or anything like that. Super chill, relaxing, happy dude. Very welcoming if you meet him in person. Dude busts ass. Dude works very, very hard. That's what it takes, but that's why he's so successful. That's why he has the collection he has. That's why he has the business he has, and that's why. And I watched that live that he did with, when Jake and PK and Dan were over at his
Mhm.
house. That was
He's
the first
still
time.
working. He's
He's
still
still
working. That's what
working.
people don't know.
Yeah,
He's
they're
not
all like
hanging out.
goofing up.
He's still working.
Yeah, they're all goofing off in the background or whatever, and he's just like, and I remember I must have watched it for like an hour and a half, 2 hours or whatever, and he got through all the lots and then was like, okay, now we're to the pack opening portion of the, and I'm like, dude, you're still going. And he's like, and then he was telling people in the chat, he's like, yeah, we're about an hour backed up, so if you buy anything now, it's probably not going to get ripped for an hour. And I'm just like, oh my god, like, yeah, man, like it takes a lot. Like it sounds fun, but you have to, like, you can't downplay the work that goes into this. And it isn't for everybody. Some people are willing to put that time and effort in, but some people just want to keep this as a hobby and maybe, get to the point where they can collect it like a net zero, and that's okay too, right? Like you don't have to completely burn yourself out on things to look cool, right? In the hobby, like, yeah, finding a balance is important for sure. So
Yeah, I mean, I think that's like, again, it comes back to like asking your question, like the why, like what do you do, and that can be, with Pokemon or collectibles or like how do I make this fun hobby I like profitable. I would say zoom it out as much as you can. Like, my personal goal, and I, in my career for what I do, like I've told my director this, I told my VP this. was like, my goal is to like basically put in as little time as possible and extract as much as I can. And I'm very upfront with that. I'm like, I will do a fantastic job for you, but I am working to buy time for myself. Like that is all I'm doing. So to take on something like, you have to think like, wow, this sounds really cool to do a bunch of cards full time or like, really hit my 50, 60-hour weeks in cardboard. But it's like, what is the long term of that? Like, what are you working toward? It's like, if you're working toward just working hard, like go find something else to do. If you're working to just be around cards a lot, like you can still do that, like Retro said, like, but you can have both. Like, do as good as you can in whatever your career or aspirations are, whatever you're trying to go for. But then also you can supplement everything and like make money while also having a good time and taking that pressure off of your livelihood being based off of shiny cardboard. I can tell you, it's not a good time. The reason, in retro, you said perfectly, like multiple streams of revenue. You look at the Dans, you look at the Z's, you look at Nick. The reason these guys can continue going as long as they have is because if one thing is failing miserably, which there are points in this hobby where things brutally fail. I mean, if you guys don't think PSA like shutting down grading for however long that was, like put out a ton of people who were doing this full time, like you're highly misunderstanding. Like some people are making all their money on graded cards and then you can't grade. Like they took all of their business away. And then these guys are going to flip raw cards and they're going to pay bills, by selling $10 singles. Like it's not going to happen. So it is something to think about. Like when it comes to really doing this, what the end goal is. Like, how do you want to retire? Like, do you want to put in a ton of time and retire early? Do you want to put in a little time and retire early? Like, and whatever that goal is, you have to be able to like put your focus on that and take those steps for it. Um, I guess the goal is like, or the point is like not to be impulsive on this just because it's really fun and maybe you made $1,000 on a quick flip. Because I promise you, there is so much more work to get to like a level in which you could be comfortable financially in this hobby than a couple of quick flips for 5 grand or whatever that amount may be. Um, One thing, and I'll throw this question to you. Let's see, Cashmere Fire. Thank you for being here. I don't think I've seen you on the channel before. He said, "Are there any particular One Piece characters that are more popular for grading?" I know nothing about One Piece, so I will leave this all to you.
Yeah, so One Piece definitely like Luffy obviously is the main character, but like Zoro does all right, Nami, a lot of waifus in One Piece. But I would just say like with anything that you're looking to get into that you're not as familiar with, like do a little bit of product research, maybe watch the show, watch a few episodes, but also just go on eBay, type in One Piece, collectible card game and look at what's selling. You know what I mean? Like look at like what you see repeatedly selling over and over, and you can do that with anything, and that'll sort of like educate you as well, and maybe you can make a play that you're not as like maybe that other people are missing or something like that. But going to your going off your point about like goals, like I feel like if you don't have goals, and this is with anything, not just with cars, but like if you don't know like what you're working towards, you can be like that can create the burnout. It's so to me like if I know exactly where things are going, like that makes me feel like okay, I'm one step closer, I'm one step closer. And when you can break things down, like financial freedom, financial independence, right? Like I will quantify, and I do this like maybe to an unhealthy point in my life too. Like I will sit and think about um so like one position that I have or whatever, like I know exactly like what the dividend payment works out to per share every month, and I know like what the shares of the company trade at. And so I will sit and think to myself, like every time like I spend money or every time I make some money, I'll think like, okay, this equates to X amount of money if I were to put it into this position that is going to pay me out monthly for the rest of my life. And that is one step closer to financial freedom. And like that re-energizes me. And then vice versa, like if I'm going to go like spend money, I'll think about like, would I rather have this or would I rather have another share of this company, which is going to pay me X amount per month for the rest of my life. And so for me, that's helpful because I can sit and break things down into like actual like achievable goals. It's very daunting when it's like, oh, I need to get to this point to be financially free. But if you break it down to like one step at a time, and ultimately to me, it's like if we're not everybody has different goals, but to me, it's like if you're trying to build wealth in collectibles, it's like, what are we doing here if we're not thinking about how the most effective path to get to like financial freedom? And like you said, buy your time, right? So that you can spend time with your friends and your family. Like humans are meant to be together. That's why we're on earth in mass numbers. People always talk about what's the best thing about the hobby. It's hanging out with other people. It's having conversations like this, right? But if you're so bogged down with like your workload or whatever, or you're a slave to debt or things like that, then you're not really going to experience life, and you're not really going to be able to like fulfill maybe your potential, right? And so when you can buy your time back to where like you have time to be creative, you have time to explore other interests and other relationships and things like that, spend time with your family, spend time with your friends, like that's really important. And that is definitely something that I'm aiming to do is buy my time, buy my freedom effectively. And if I can do that with, you know, cards and collectibles, like what a blessing, right? Like what a
Yeah.
crazy blessing that is, right? If I can use collectibles to multiply my wealth to retire early so that I can live a fulfilling life with my friends and family and not want for things, and if I have kids, be able to, you know, put them through school and things like that, and do that off of something that I'm passionate about and love, like what a huge blessing. But again, like it's finding what's going to make that sustainable so that I can get to that point. So yeah, another rant, but
No,
I think
I love it. I mean, it's spot on. I mean, it's one of those things like it makes no sense to look at a, let's say, a card business, collectibles business, and looking at multiple revenue streams and not looking at your life and looking at what multiple revenue streams you could have. Like you could have collectibles with multiple revenue streams as one of your revenue streams, and then do something else that branches off. I mean, I read a book a long time ago, but it was basically like every millionaire needs 7 revenue streams or something like that. I don't necessarily believe in 7. I think that's like a lot more than you need. I don't think you literally have enough time like to give all this attention. I think realistically, 3 or 4 different things at most, like that you really are putting effort into, can feed into like you being able to have a lifestyle where you can buy yourself time. Where it's like I carve out this amount of hours throughout the day, or I space them out. Like for you, for example, you deal with international people, so it's like your time zones really impact like when you work. So it's like, hey, I know that I've got this section during like my US time and I've got this section at night, but this gap is all me. Like it's just being able to have that control, I think, should always be the goal. And I think people miss like they mistake the hamster wheel for how everybody just does life. And like I promise you, like the guys who are really successful in doing anything professionally or like, you know, the financial freedom you're talking about, they're watching all these people on the hamster wheel going like, why don't they just get off? Like there's a lot other ways to get this thing moving. You know what I mean? So yeah, I agree with you. I think collectibles is one of those things that like, I mean, how truly like awesome is it that we can like sell shiny cardboard? And like if I told my grandparents, my great grandparents, I will sell pictures of fake like monsters and make like X amount of money. To be like, well, we did something right because the world is that way. But I just think that it's the intent behind the business is really is the key for everything. And I think you're like you said, like your long term goal, your motivation, like if the goal is to get into cardboard, you'll be done once you're in cardboard. But if your goal is to like, I want financial freedom and cardboard is a part of that, like it, like you said, it gives you something to work toward. It makes you get up in the morning. It allows you to have that motivation to, wow, I really don't want to have to list these cards. Like I've had moments like that a ton. I'm like, I just got, you know, 30, 40 cards back from PSN. Like, I don't really feel like posting these. Like, which is so, I'm so lucky to be able to do that. Like, right. Like, it's like, I'm not leveraged into them. I'm like, I just don't feel like posting these. Yeah, it's Sunday. Sundays are the best time to do auctions for certain ones, but like, I'm just going to like not do this. Like, I don't know. It's just like so awesome that we can have the opportunity to do that or not do that. And if we just decide to like make money from it, like we can actually make a significant amount on some of these cards, like especially the vintage stuff that we sell. Um, but beyond that, I guess let me see. Mr. Kite has a question. It's pretty funny. Question for Retro: Human instrumentality. Am I reading that right? Yay or nay?
yeah, that's from Mr. Kite must have seen me on lives or something where I talked about Neon Genesis Evangelion. It's probably like my favorite definitely like my favorite anime of all time, probably like one of my favorite TV shows of all time, but not this will be a whole like long conversation. So I'll make it brief, but basically the idea of human instrumentality is like the decision between like understanding that life has life has beauty and life has like all these like amazing things and positive feelings, but there's another side of that, which is like you're going to feel pain, you're going to feel loss, people are going to die, right? And so it's like the idea of whether or not like the like you could live in instrumentality, which is basically where like everything is static. There's no like pleasure, but there's also no pain, right? And so the idea of it is like choosing between like living in a static existence to where like you don't ever need to worry about like insecurities or pain or anything like that, but then you also don't get to experience any of the positive things that life brings, right? And so that's kind of like the focal point of the show is deciding basically like humanity's fate. And yeah, so I'm against human instrumentality. I definitely think that you need there's going to be pain in life, there's going to be mistakes that you made, you know, people are going to die, you're going to have uncomfortable situations, but life's got a lot of beautiful things out there, right? And a lot of amazing things to experience. And I think that all the pain and heartache and grief and that stuff is worth the other side of the coin, which is all the positive, beautiful things that come with life. So yeah.
Deep cuts, Mr. Kite. I haven't heard Retro talk that deep on something in a while. So thank you
Yeah,
for
yeah,
the
very
comment.
deep, very deep.
So what we'll do, guys, if you have any more questions to ask, please drop them in the chat because we'll probably wrap up here if we don't have any more questions. But La Butter, I like the profile picture, Grand Party, cool card. This is, where do y'all see, I think you meant the 30-year anniversary, huge vintage boom or what? I will let you take that first.
To be honest, like I don't really think there's going to be any sort of catalyst for vintage appreciating. I think like a lot of that stuff is just going to slowly trickle up over time. The more of it that enters hands of like actual collectors that don't need to sell, don't want to sell, are looking to complete sets and sort of like have forever items. Eventually, certain things are going to dry up. It's probably like we talked about earlier in the podcast. Like it's going to be, in my opinion, primarily popular Pokemon. And you know, like higher end like trophy cards and promo cards and things like that, when they dry up, they'll start moving. But I don't think it's going to be like an overnight, like modern sells out on Pokemon Center, gaps up 20% the next day. I don't think that's going to happen with vintage personally. I think that 30th anniversary will bring a lot of people back into the hobby. I think that the 25th anniversary, they weren't necessarily like as prepared for, because no one could have expected the resurgence of the hobby and how many people flooded in. Pokemon is making tons more money now than they were in like 2018, 2019, thinking about what they were going to do for the 25th anniversary. They know how big the hobby is. I'm excited for how big they're going to go with it, right? I think that they're going to blow like what they did with the 25th anniversary out of the water with the 30th, or at least I hope so. I don't know. Maybe that's too bullish. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that it's hard for me to think of a vintage boom anymore, only because I think there's a few different factors that I've talked about in the past, like when it comes to vintage cards in particular exploding. I think one of the biggest issues is, and I mentioned it earlier in this as well, anything that could ever be for sale has been for sale, and some multiple times over. I mean, how many illustrators have been thrown up for sale? Like how many insane, like what you thought would be one of a kind trophies are like out there. When I think vintage now, I don't think in the terms of like set cards. I think of like historical, like I mean, you think of Magic the Gathering, right? Like what do you think of when you think of Magic the Gathering? You think of the Power Nine, Black Lotus, like you think of that. You don't think of all the other cards that people probably at that time, like or now, like think, oh well, this is so valued. Like, no, you think of the top heavy hitters. That is really truly how I view vintage now. I don't really think about set cards. Obviously, first edition Shadowless base sets are like obviously that's going to be one of those that's in there too. But um, yeah, I don't see any sort of anniversary making vintage boom. I agree with Retro in the fact that I think it's going to be a slow, this kind of line. Like I don't think it's going to be constantly up. I think it's going to go have its ups and downs. But I think we're entering into a portion now or a time period now where I think that um, I don't want to say vintage is forgotten, but I truly don't think we're going to see another boom like we saw before, because I think there was a lot of people buying their nostalgia, and I think all that money's bought it. And I think anybody who's going to be in here for the long term has already bought that stuff up, and maybe they're still buying positions, things like that. But I think we're getting to a point now where modern is going to define this entire market now going forward. And if vintage does come back, I say come back compared to what it was, I think it's going to be because of it being the historical importance and Pokemon as a whole benefiting vintage because it is Pokemon. I don't think that vintage itself is going to be its own little thing. I think it's just going to be a part of the whole, if that makes sense. Like I don't know if I worded that necessarily correctly, but again, I just think back to Magic the Gathering. What do I think of? That's what vintage is going to be. There's going to be a very small handful of select cards that are going to be very, very valuable. And I think the others are either going to be stagnant or you're not going to see a huge meteoric rise for anything that this hobby could do, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, like Dark Char, like I don't know, just picking like some random card like Dark Charizard or something. Like if you hop on eBay right now, there's probably 25, 30 Dark Charizards for sale. The 30th anniversary happening, I don't think is all of a sudden going to bring in so many people that don't know Dark Charizard exists to where they like buy them out so aggressively that the price shoots up 40% or anything like that. But it's popular Pokemon, you know, like over time, could it like slowly move up? Yeah, maybe. But like overall, like I think the 30th anniversary will be positive for the hobby. Like I definitely think it'll bring people in, but like Peak said, I 100% agree that a lot of the people that want these cards already have them or most of them, right? And they're not going to like so aggressively push the prices up on things. And a lot of the people that want these cards too are more educated consumers. They've been here for longer. They've been down and they're down the rabbit hole because they're collecting vintage. So they're educated buyers. They're not people that are going to like buy all-time highs a lot of the time. They're going to wait for a good auction. They're going to check PWCC. They're going to check eBay and wait for the card that they want to fill the set. And catch it for potentially slightly below market, or try to make a deal at a show and get it for market price minus eBay fees and pay cash. You know what I mean? So a lot of those people are educated buyers as well, and that's something I think that people need to take into account. But
Absolutely. Well, what we'll do is we'll do LeButter. He had one more question here, and I'll throw this in. This would be probably a good time for us. We're hitting the 2 hour mark, so we'll go ahead and finish on this question. What do you think the 30th has in store? I guess like instead of trying to guess what Pokemon will do, what would you love to see in a 30th anniversary product or multiple products?
30th anniversary like honestly, I would like to see a good game. Like if we're going outside of the cards, like I would like to see a game.
Not going outside of cards, Retro. You're not taking it out. I want cards.
Oh, I want cards. Man. Okay.
Because I know that's what LeButter's talking about.
I think I mean, I don't know, like it's kind of a basic, like, but I think that they see that when they touch back on things that are nostalgic to people, they understand now more than ever that a large percentage of their consumer base is adults, is 90s kids and things like that. And it's worked, right? Like people were very hyped on Celebrations. It was a very, mass ripped set. People were stoked on it. People are very hyped on 151, obviously, like arguably the most hyped set since I've been in the hobby. And people are already excited about the Team Rocket. Why is that? It's all nostalgia based. These are not like brand new ideas that they're coming up with. So I think, if they brought back other things that were popular, like I would like to see e-readers personally. Like if they did full art e-readers to where like the entire side of the card was like that would be sick to me personally. Like I think that would be really cool. Full art gold stars, things like that. Like took some of the same artists. Like maybe you have Fukuda come through, do all the gold stars again, but they're full arts this time, right? And that would be sick to me. Still touching back to that nostalgia that gets everybody excited and gives people that nostalgia crack, but keeping in with the modern and like where art has gone and how crazy art has been, like that would be pretty cool to me personally. What do you think?
So I would say for 30th, so here's what I'd love to see. I would love to see 3 boxes be released for this. Pokemon Red, Pokemon Blue, and Pokemon Yellow. Name it whatever you want, but that's what I want the themes to be for each one. And I want them to have exclusive arts in each box. Similar arts, obviously, same cards in all the boxes. But I want like 10 to 20 exclusive arts in each box. And I want 3 products to buy. and that would be super cool because it calls back to the games. And realistically, if you have somebody like, what's your favorite game, blue, yellow, or red? I mean, the answer is yellow, but it would be cool to have like the callback to the video games, like what people grew up on, and be able to have like maybe for each one, like blue has an exclusive Blastoise art, Charizard has an exclusive Charizard art in red, and then Pikachu art is exclusive in yellow. I think that would be super cool to have like a very themed collection of products versus just one single product. Um, yeah, that or I mean, I've always called it like I would love a Safari Zone set or like something like that, like to call back
Yeah,
to like
Safari Zone would be sick. Or like to your point about the red, blue, and yellow thing too. Like maybe they release a product. I don't know like what it's called, but you don't know what you're getting in it. To where like you could get like maybe there's 10
Pokemon
packs.
gets in the mystery box game, man.
No, not mystery box,
Spicy
but like
take.
in the games, like the main differences between like red, blue, and yellow were like obviously yellow, you had Pikachu behind you, but like you could only catch certain Pokemon in each game, and so maybe like they release a set to where you like let's say the ETB is 10 packs. It's a completely random seeding of how many red packs, how many blue packs, how many yellow packs, and you can
Mm.
only pull certain hits out of each pack. So it creates like an extra level of chase. You know what I'm saying? Because certain people are going to hunt for certain Pokemon out of the blue pack, out of the red pack. That would be kind of cool, I think. And they don't really do that. I mean, they have pack arts, but it's all the same stuff, right? So
That would be cool to have colored packs though,
yeah,
like an actual all red pack with Charizard, all blue pack with Blastoise, and all yellow with Pikachu. Because then at that point, like if you wanted to grade packs or like you wanted to do stuff like that, like or if you're not even just grading, you just a pack collector. Like imagine those framed like with the games or something. Like that would be super sick to
yeah,
see.
people would lose their mind. I like the CD promos, like those still hit to me. I've seen them so many times, but like the big three CD promos, I don't know, man. Like those cards are still sick. So I totally agree with you. If you had all three of the packs with like some Sugi art or something, like yeah, it'd be a good one for sure. So
And also about I would want a serialized card or serialized cards. They're already
okay.
like I would need that. I would need that in 30th. Like just that product. Don't do what you know Magic is doing at this point where like every set has serialized cards, like just 30th. Like give us serialized. Like if PSA can serialize their magazines, we can get serialized cards. Like come
Yeah,
on.
that is
It's time.
insane. I hope I get one of the serialized Lorcana ones because I've seen those sell for crazy
I didn't
pricing.
get I got the regular Mickey. I just got it like 2 days ago.
Yeah, it's so nuts, man. Like there's so much money in the hobby. People are out here paying $500 for serialized magazines, but God bless them.
One day. Well, chat, I appreciate you guys hanging out. We've gone for a couple hours now. I think it's been a great conversation, really informative. And yeah, Retro, appreciate you coming on, man. I think this was awesome and talking about kind of the financials and the business side. I think it's, again, if other people who've watched this back or watching this live are like kind of really in the weeds as we are, this might just be preaching to the choir, but hopefully everybody here got at least some sort of nugget of knowledge of like how we operate, what our experiences have been, especially if you're newer to this. I mean, hopefully we didn't demotivate you talking about like don't go into cardboard full time unless you know what you're doing. But like, realistically, if you've learned anything from this, like please let us know. Like, and that's something on these videos. Like, if you guys comment anything, I always respond. So, again, like, subscribe, all that fun algorithms. This actually is I think once this video uploads, I'll officially be monetized on YouTube. So I have like memberships, like super chats and stuff, which is cool. It was never really the goal, kind of an organic growth, but that does encourage me obviously to get more in front of the camera and like do this stuff. So appreciate everybody who's been on the journey, everybody who's watching. That's awesome. But I guess before we kind of wrap and kind of talk post stream, anything you want to talk about retro, all your links and stuff are plugged, but anything you want to talk about before we head out?
I would just say like I appreciate you having me on, and like I've learned a lot from you over the years in the hobby, and I think that like one of the things that you really exemplify is like relationships, right? Because like you've done a lot with the trophy cards and the world stuff, and a lot of that has been you reaching out and doing the work to find these people, but then like cultivating relationships with these people, so that you can like get the cards and bring like these rare competitor cards to market. And I haven't really seen a lot of people do that. And so you sort of like carved out that niche. And so, yeah, it's cool to call you a homie for sure. And it's been cool to see like all the different things you've been able to accomplish. And yeah, I appreciate you having me on, man. Because like I said earlier, like all the people you have on are always the heavy hitters. So I feel like I'm a little above my, or a little, I'm under the weight class of the people that are normally on here. So I appreciate you reaching out for sure.
Yeah, no way, man. You are interesting and fun and enjoyable to speak to. So that is all my requirements usually. But I appreciate the kind words, man. And chat, thank you guys so much. Again, Retro's links and everything will be below. If you need Japanese boxes, cases, all that good stuff, fund this man's hobby. He's doing well and he's getting really fantastic prices. Coming from somebody who has multiple people who do or try to do what he does, he's doing it right and a very trusted source, as he said. So appreciate everybody tonight. Hope you guys enjoy your weekend, and yeah, hopefully I'll be back here in a week or two. We'll see. But I appreciate everybody. Thanks again, guys.